Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Happy Wednesday. Halfway through the week. You all know what that means. It's time for more reading streams, or as I like to call them, story time. I am your host, Ray Langley. Hello. Okay, so a lot happened last time, and I think it'll probably be a good idea if I were to do a sort of catch-up session. So I'm gonna start us off with a what do you call it? A summary, chapter by chapter summary for the last 4 chapters that we read last week before we dive into this possible last stretch. Just because I want everyone to absolutely be as caught up as possible with the story. Actually, I think just in case this is anybody's either first time or they weren't here last time for the story breakdown, we're gonna go ahead and quickly do a summary read through of the story so far, just because I have a really good feeling that we might try to finish the story tonight, so I want everybody to be on board. So here we go, okay? Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. The summary so far for chapters 1 through 12? 12. So, the story begins with a description of all of the guests that are invited to stay on Soldier Island and their journey to a rendezvous point where they will take a boat to the island. Each guest has a personal invitation, most of them written by someone who signs with the initials UN and the surname Owen. Not all of the signatures are legible enough to be read, which allows Miss Emily Brent to believe that her letter is from an acquaintance with the last name Oliver. Vera Claythorne has been hired as a secretary to a Mrs. Owen. Dr. Armstrong has been asked to come take care of Mrs. Owen. Ex-Inspector Blore has been hired to make sure nobody steals Mrs. Owen's jewels. And Philip Lombard has been hired to do whatever Mr. Owen asks him to do, regardless of its legality. General MacArthur thinks he is meeting up with his old army buddies. Anthony Marston believes he is visiting another wealthy man and races in on his sports car to the meeting point. On his way there, he passes Dr. Armstrong in his car, who reflects on this as an event that shook him and got him to stop drinking. Justice Wargrave gets a letter from a Lady Constance Comington, Wargrave being the only person to not get a letter from somebody with the surname Owen. As ex-Inspector Blore travels to the meeting point on a train, an old man seated next to him tells Blore that a squall, which is a type of storm, is coming, and, quote, the day of judgment is at hand. Chapter 2. All of the guests meet at Oakbridge and later take taxis to the boat's launch. They introduce themselves to each other and the conversations are a little awkward. It seems odd that none of these people know each other at all, and the general thinks that there's something off with Philip Lombard. Lombard thinks it's strange that Vera Claythorne has been hired to be a secretary, but Vera says that she was a substitute for a secretary who became ill. No one appears to have actually met their hosts, the supposed Owens. Ex-Inspector Blore tells everyone that his name is Mr. Davis, and he is from South Africa. Lombard evades Vera's question about their host by pretending that there is a wasp on her arm. The boat's driver, Fred Narracott, remarks to himself that the crowd in the boat is not like the guests that he has taken to the island back when the millionaire owned it. He thinks of Anthony Marston, who screeches up to the launch in an expensive sports car, as the right kind of person, quote, born to money. Everyone else looks at Marston as though he were a young Norse god, a handsome golden boy, full of vitality, who impresses everyone who lays eyes on him. The narrator says everyone will remember the moment they met him later on. Fred tells the passengers the island cannot be reached during a storm, and they all become a little nervous about so many people packed into a small boat. Upon reaching Soldier Island, they meet Rogers, the butler, and his wife, Ethel, the cook, who lead them to their rooms. Vera Claythorne talks with Mrs. Rogers, noticing that she is a woman who looks as though she is always afraid, and Vera wonders why she and her husband have not yet met their own employer. Vera is amused to notice a copy of a nursery rhyme, 10 Little Soldiers, on the wall in her room. She begins to think about how one could drown at sea and tries to get the thought out of her head. Dr. Armstrong arrives on the island late and realizes that he recognizes Justice Wargrave, having testified in front of him before in court. General MacArthur continues to think that there's something off about Philip Lombard. Meanwhile, Emily Brent reads a passage in her Bible about God's judgment. Chapter 3. After dinner, the guests notice that there are 10 crystal figurines on the table, matching the 10 soldiers from the rhyme that the guests discover are in all of their rooms. Vera Claythorne believes it amusing, but Justice Wargrave mutters that it is childish. Vera and Emily Brent leave the dining room to go to the drawing room, and Vera is put off by the sound of the ocean waves. In conversation, Vera corrects Miss Brent's mistake about the host's last name, and Emily says she has never met anyone named Owen in her life. Before the two women can explore the ramifications of this realization, the men enter the room and everyone has coffee. Suddenly, however, there is a voice ringing out from the walls accusing each guest, as well as Rogers and his wife, of specific murders for which justice has never been served, naming each guest with their full name and the full names of their victims, with one exception, that being the 21 men of an East African tribe who were left to die by Philip Lombard. Rogers is so shocked he drops the coffee tray, and his wife Ethel screams and falls to the floor. Philip Lombard and Anthony Marston rush to bring her to a couch, and Dr. Armstrong treats her, giving her brandy. They discover that the voice came from a record on a gramophone in the next room, which plays through holes drilled into the walls. They put Ethel Rogers to bed, and Dr. Armstrong gives her a sedative. Everyone meets again in the drawing room to talk about what just happened. The men all have drinks to settle their nerves. Justice Wargrave questions Mr. Rogers, who says that he and his wife were hired by letter from an agency and have never met the Owens. Rogers insists he played the record on a written order from Mr. Owen and shows Justice Wargrave this letter. Wargrave asks everyone in the room to talk about their invitation to Soldier Island. In the process, they discover that ex-Inspector Bloor is there under an assumed identity and is not actually from South Africa. Bloor admits that he was hired to protect Mrs. Owen's jewels, but now he thinks there is no such person and no such jewels. Wargrave notices the initials for each letter are UN and Owen, which he puts together as meaning unknown. He concludes they've all been invited to the island by a homicidal lunatic. Chapter 4. Justice Wargrave adds his letter from Lady Constance Colmington to the pile of evidence regarding the reason for being on the island, noting that the letter is written in a way that matches Colmington's style. Wargrave concludes that whoever set this trap knows about everyone's lives, their friends, their actions, and most of all, their mistakes. Everyone in the group tries to defend themselves at once, but Wargrave has the first opportunity to insist on his innocence. He claims that the prisoner Edward Seton was guilty, even though the defense attorney thought the jury would judge him innocent, and he feels no guilt about acting according to the law and convicting Seton, sentencing him to death. Dr. Armstrong remembers this case, privately thinking the judge was lying about not knowing Seton personally. The others then begin to tell their stories one by one. Vera Claythorne, tearfully, tells the story of her time as a governess or nanny to Cyril Hamilton, who she says swam out too far into the ocean. She claims that she tried to save him, but couldn't arrive on time. The inquest exonerated her, and the child's mother never held a grudge against her. General MacArthur claims that Arthur Richmond wasn't his wife's lover, and the dangerous assignment that he sent him on followed normal wartime protocol. Philip Lombard cheerily admits to leaving 21 natives to die, horrifying the general and Vera. Lombard believes natives, quote, didn't mind dying. Anthony Marston remembers that he did in fact hit 2 children on a road in Cambridge, calling it a beastly nuisance that the children rushed out into the road. He says speeds come to stay and feels no remorse for his actions. Just an accident, he claims. Rogers explains that he and his wife did in fact take care of an elderly woman named Jennifer Brady, who was always ill. On the night that she died, the telephone was out of service because of a storm, and Rogers went to get the doctor on foot, Miss Brady dying before the doctor could reach her. Rogers claims no one ever complained about their work at Miss Brady's home. Ex-Inspector Bloor cuts in, asking as an ex-detective would. It came into a little something at her death though, eh? Rogers insists that their only inheritance was the reward of a job well done. Lombard questions ex-Inspector Bloor about getting a promotion for providing evidence to convict Landor, and Bloor insists he was just doing his job. Dr. Armstrong claims not to remember the patient that he is accused of killing, saying that patients come to him too late to be saved all the time, but privately remembers the case in which he was drunk, most definitely killing his patients through a combination of negligence and malpractice. The case shocked him enough to get sober, and none of the sisters in the hospital ever said a word about his culpability. Emily Brent is the only one who refuses to defend herself. She says she has a clear conscience and nothing with which to reproach herself. Roger says that there is no one else on the island and no boat, so they have to wait for Fred Narracott to come the next morning to get them off the island. Anthony Marston thinks that they should stay and solve the mystery, saying, "I'm all for crime. Here's to it." Then downs his drink, dying moments later. With the situation... Oh, this is chapter 5, by the way. With the situation on Soldier Island becoming more dangerous, now that Anthony Marston had died, the guests think that the death at first is a suicide, but then they all remember seeing Marston roaring up to the dock in a sports car, looking lively as ever, and it doesn't seem likely that such a person would end themselves. Dr. Armstrong tests the glass that he drank from, as well as the whiskey and the soda bottles, and says that the glass he drank from contains cyanide. No one, however, saw anyone put anything into Marston's glass. Everyone goes to bed, and Rogers cleans up the dining room. He notices one of the crystal figures is missing. Justice Wargrave thinks about the Seton case and feels satisfied that he was the deciding factor in condemning him to death. Meanwhile, General MacArthur can't sleep because he envisions his wife, Leslie, with Arthur Richmond. They were having an affair. He remembers the cold, murderous rage that surfaced in him when he realized the affair had been going on for a while behind his back. He knows that intentionally he murdered Richmond. He never told Leslie that he found out about the affair. But she became an empty person after Richmond's death, and shortly after died of double pneumonia. General MacArthur fears that Armitage, another young soldier in his ranks, figured out his intentions and spoke to his peers. General MacArthur began to avoid his friends, who he says started to treat him differently. He decides this is a good time and place in life to end it, and decides he will not leave the island alive. Vera Claythorne also can't sleep. She thinks of Hugo Hamilton, her former lover, telling her that if Cyril were a girl, he would have inherited enough money to marry Vera. Vera thinks about how the scrawny little Cyril begged and whined to swim out to a rock in the middle of the ocean. She didn't think he would have drowned. She also notices that Marston's death is just the thing that happened in the first verse of the rhyme in her room, and thinks to herself that she would never kill herself. Chapter 6. Dr. Armstrong dreams that he has to murder a patient on the table without arousing the suspicion of the sister or the British nurse attending the surgery. He first thinks he has to murder Miss Brent, who is malicious, but the patient morphs into Anthony Marston, who is dead yet laughing. The shaking in his dream turns out to be from Rogers trying to rouse him to tell the doctor he cannot wake his wife and something feels wrong. The doctor examines her and tells Rogers that Ethel is dead. Rogers says his wife never used sleeping pills and only took what Armstrong gave her last night. The boat hasn't yet shown up and there is a storm coming. Dr. Armstrong waits until after breakfast to tell the other guests about Ethel Rogers. Everyone makes small talk until then, purposely avoiding talk about the island itself. But when Dr. Armstrong delivers the bad news, Emily Brent, who decides that Rogers died of fright due to guilt, says that this was an act of God, and that the wrath of God can strike down sinners. Justice Wargrave tells her that Providence leaves that sort of thing to mortals. Ex-Inspector Blore thinks that Rogers killed her because she was becoming weak-willed, and might tell the rest of them that they did kill Jennifer Brady. Jennifer, General MacArthur doesn't think that a man would do that to his wife, but ex-Inspector Bloor says, when a man's neck's in danger, he doesn't stop to think too much about sentiment. Philip Lombard tells Bloor he thinks the boat isn't coming because it's part of a plan. General MacArthur wanders past them and says they will never leave this island. He mutters that there's peace in that knowledge. To come to the end, not have to go on. And then wanders into the yard and off to the seaside. Lombard and Bloor think that he has lost his mind. Dr. Armstrong comes out on the terrace and is about to speak with Justice Wargrave, but Rogers begs him to come inside. Rogers is completely terrorized and points out to Dr. Armstrong that one of the figurines went missing the night before, and now another one has. There is only 8. Chapter 7. Vera Claythorne asks Emily Brent if she really believes that Rogers and his wife killed Jennifer Brady. Emily Brent says she does. Vera panics and wonders about her opinion of the other cases. Miss Brent says some of them are far-fetched, although Philip Lombard did admit that he left people to die. Vera repeats Philip Lombard's words about the only natives line, but Miss Brent says that black or white, they are our brothers. Vera begins to lose hold of her emotions, vehemently disagreeing with Miss Brent. Internally, of course. Miss Brent then tells Vera about Beatrice, her maid, who became pregnant. She didn't want to tell the story in front of the men, but reveals privately to Vera why Beatrice died. Miss Brent fired Beatrice, who then later committed suicide by throwing herself into the river. Emily Brent's lack of guilt over her actions and her conviction in them, that she was justified, terrifies Vera. "Weren't you sorry?" asks Vera. Emily Brent simply puts up a, quote, armor of virtue. Dr. Armstrong speaks privately with Philip Lombard and tells him that Rogers and Ethel could have killed their employer very simply by withholding medication from Jennifer Brady. Lombard wonders if Ethel Rogers committed suicide, but Armstrong thinks that 2 suicides in a row is unrealistic. He also thinks that Anthony Marston did not commit suicide, because no one carries cyanide around with them. Dr. Armstrong theorizes they may have fallen in the clutches of a homicidal maniac because the cause of the deaths of Marston and Mrs. Rogers match the first 2 verses of the nursery rhyme. Dr. Armstrong says Rogers can't be lying about there being no one else on the island because he is scared nearly out of his senses. The doctor and Lombard decide to rope Bloor in to help them search the island for a killer. They leave the women out of it, and they don't tell Justice Wargrave or General MacArthur. Chapter 8. Ex-Inspector Bloor, Philip Lombard, and Dr. Armstrong set out to search the island for the murderer. Lombard reveals he has a revolver on him, which Bloor at first thinks is useful, but then wonders to Dr. Armstrong why Lombard would have brought one during a vacation. During their search, they come across General MacArthur, who is sitting in a trance at the seaside. He snaps at them and says that there is so little time and that they need to leave him alone. They all think the general has completely lost his mind, and Armstrong begins to wonder if the general is the killer. The men continue their search, find nothing, and realize they can't adequately search the cliffs without a rope. Bloor retrieves some rope, and Lombard volunteers to drop down the side of the cliff to explore. Vera Claythorne tries to avoid Emily Brent now that she knows what Emily is like, but she can't stop thinking about the young maid Beatrice drowning. She then envisions the young Seton being sent to death by Justice Wargrave. When she goes outside to get some air, Vera sees the general and speaks with him. The general tells her that he actually sent Richmond to his death because of the affair with Leslie, and that the general loved his wife very much. After Richmond's death, Leslie left him alone, and he was even lonelier when she died. He tells Vera, "You'll be glad, too, when the end comes." Vera doesn't understand this. The men find nothing on the island, so they search the house. Rogers passes by them with drinks. They hear a sound upstairs and think it's the murderer, but it's just Rogers getting his clothes out of his room because he doesn't want to sleep in the room with his wife's dead body. Rogers moves so quickly and quietly, they thought it was a stranger in the room. Rogers speaks only to Dr. Armstrong, and the men continue their search, finding nothing, agreeing that there is no one else in the island but their 8 selves. Chapter 9. At first, Ex-Inspector Bloor is relieved that they haven't found anyone else on the island, and thinks that this means the 2 deaths are accidental, but forgets that cyanide is not a common substance to use in one's drink. Bloor indirectly accuses Dr. Armstrong of making a mistake with Mrs. Rogers' sedative, which Armstrong vehemently denies. Bloor mentions the accusation made against Dr. Armstrong, that he did kill one of his patients on the operating table. Philip Lombard accuses Bloor of perjury, and Bloor wants to know why Lombard's carrying a gun. Lombard admits to his reason for being on the island and explains his interaction with an Isaac Morris and the 100 guineas that Morris gave Lombard to go to the island with the others. Lombard thinks they're all in a trap, but wants to know where Owen, the man who apparently wrote all the letters, could possibly be. Rogers is worried because Fred Narracott hasn't yet come to deliver food to the island, and a storm is on the way. Vera Claythorne comes rushing in, late for lunch, and everyone notices General MacArthur is not yet there either. Rogers offers to go get him, but Dr. Armstrong gets up to find the general. He comes running back to tell everyone the general is dead, and Vera is the one who shouts it out. As the men are bringing in the body, Vera and Rogers run into each other at the table, and Vera harshly says to Rogers, "There are only 7. The doctor comes down and tells Justice Wargrave that the general died from a blow to the head, possibly by a life preserver. Wargrave turns to everyone and says that since there is no one else on the island, it then must be the case that Mr. Owen is one of them. Lombard ends up having to repeat his story about why he has the revolver, and Wargrave lets everyone know that up to this point, none of the crimes were unmanageable by a smaller person, so the women are suspects. Wargrave says, "There can be no exceptions allowed on the score of character, position, or probability. They have only to consider the facts. After a long haul through all the facts, during which each person gets a turn to feel indignant that the judge seems to be accusing them of being the murderer, the judge wraps up the inquiry, saying that there aren't enough facts to accuse or exonerate anyone, so they must all suspect each other and protect themselves before they can get back to the mainland." Chapter 10. Vera Claythorne and Philip Lombard talk with each other about who the murderer might be. They both think it can't be true that one of them must be a murderer. Lombard thinks Vera is too level-headed, and Vera hesitates to return the compliment. She knows Lombard has a gun and has killed before, but she tells him she doesn't think he would orchestrate this kind of creepy chain of killings. Lombard says the only way he would commit a murder is for his own benefit, and there's no benefit to killing all the guests on this island. The killer is doing it for fun. Lombard is plumping for, or betting on, Justice Wargrave as the murderer because he thinks it's just a short distance between judge and executioner. Vera thinks it's the doctor because he's the one who has access to so many poisons. Doctors often go mad from stress, and he had the opportunity to kill General MacArthur. No one else in the group knows how to determine how long a body's been dead either. Rogers has a conversation with someone besides the doctor for the very first time. He asks ex-Inspector Bloor if he has an idea who the murderer is, seeing as he's an ex-cop. Bloor says if he's right, the person is a cool customer, but Bloor isn't sure, and Rogers has no idea who it might be. The lack of knowledge is what scares him the most. Dr. Armstrong and Justice Wargrave are conversing about who the killer might be. Dr. Armstrong thinks they have to find a way to leave the island before they're murdered in their beds. Wargrave privately thinks Armstrong's thinking in cliches and shows a lack of creativity. Wargrave says he thinks he knows who the killer is and thinks that there are a few things they can do. Armstrong doesn't know what he's getting at. Meanwhile, Miss Brent is in her room writing in her journal, and her mind leads her to write that Beatrice, the pregnant maid, is the killer. She realizes she's losing her grip. Tea time returns the group to a quote blessed normality, but a couple of things go missing. Emily Brent's wool yarn and an oil silk curtain. That evening, when everyone goes to bed, they all lock their doors. Rogers locks the figurine in a cabinet so that the killer can't get at them. Chapter 11. The next morning, no one wakes up to the smell of breakfast because there isn't any. Philip Lombard is the first to notice this, and he wakes up ex-Inspector Blore. Justice Wargrave is not out of bed yet, but Dr. Armstrong and Vera Claythorne are dressed. Emily Brent is not in her room. Lombard realizes Rogers is missing and the kitchen fire is out. It looks like he has dressed and shaved, but there is no other sign of him. Emily Brent comes back from walking outside and says she hasn't seen Rogers either. She and Vera set the table, and Vera notices there's only 6 figurines. The group finds Rogers near the shed where he was chopping kindling. There's an axe wound to the head, and he's dead. Armstrong theorizes whether one of the women could have committed this crime. Vera comes outside ranting about a beehive because the chopping sticks verse of the nursery rhyme has come true, and the next one is about a beehive. Dr. Armstrong slaps her to get her to stop ranting. She goes inside to fix breakfast with Miss Brent. Lombard and Blore wonder aloud to each other about Emily Brent having been outside when Rogers was killed. After more conjecture about other possible suspects for the latest murder, Lombard says Blore doesn't have the imagination to commit these intricately linked murders, and Blore admits to having committed perjury to avoid the wrath of a gang. Lombard thinks Blore won't survive the island, but is pretty sure he himself will live. Vera wonders why Miss Brent is so calm and asks her why she isn't afraid of dying. Emily Brent reminisces about her family and how staid they were, never showing their stress. She also believes that because she has led what she thinks is an upright life, that God will take care of her. She thinks General MacArthur's welcome attitude to death was impious, and thinks of the young maid Beatrice, who was in her dreams the night before, begging to be let inside. Of course, Emily didn't let her in. At breakfast, all 6 guests are quiet, thinking to themselves similar thoughts about what will happen next, and it appears that 2 of the guests are thinking of a plan, one of them thinking the other a fool for believing him. And lastly, the summary for Chapter 12. After breakfast, Vera Claythorne and Emily Brent rise to clear the dishes, but Emily has to sit down again. She feels, quote, giddy. Ex-Inspector Blore says he's domestic and goes into the kitchen to help with the dishes. Everyone else does too, leaving Emily Brent at the dining room table alone. Miss Brent hears a buzzing in her ear and sees a bumblebee on the window. She thinks of honey dripping, then of the drowned Beatrice dripping. She tries to call out and move her head, but can't. Then she smells something wet, hears footsteps, and feels a prick on her neck. Everyone is in the drawing room waiting for Emily Brent. Justice Wargrave says they should all discuss what they should do next, but before they go into the next room, Blore says he thinks Miss Brent's religious mania makes her a prime suspect for the murders. Vera admits Miss Brent told her the story of Beatrice drowning and she felt no remorse at all. The group goes into the drawing room to confront Miss Brent and discover she is dead. Dr. Armstrong says it wasn't a bee sting, but a syringe full of cyanide that killed her. He discovers the syringe in his bag is missing. Justice Wargrave tells everyone they have to pool all the medications and weapons that they have and lock them away and submit to a search. Philip Lombard discovers that the revolver in his drawer has gone missing. The men are searched to the skin, and Vera gets to wear a bathing suit for her search. Everything dangerous is locked in one cabinet and then in another. Blore gets one key and Lombard gets the other, their physical builds and strength cited as obstacles to the potential killer. The broken syringe and figurine show up under the window, but the group still can't find the revolver. And now, we are caught up to the story summary. So, we begin with chapter 13. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. One of us. One of us. One of us. 3 words, endlessly repeated, dinning themselves hour after hour into receptive brains. 5 people. 5 frightened people. 5 people who watched each other, who now hardly troubled to hide their state of nervous tension. There was little pretense now, no formal veneer of conversation. They were 5 enemies linked together by a mutual instinct of self-preservation, and all of them suddenly looked less like human beings. They were reverting to more bestial types. Like a wary old tortoise, Mr. Justice Wargrave sat hunched up, his body motionless, his eyes keen and alert. Ex-Inspector Blore looked coarser and clumsier in build. His walk was that of a slow, padding animal. His eyes were bloodshot. There was a look of mingled ferocity and stupidity about him. He was more like a beast at bay, ready to charge its pursuers. Philip Lombard's senses seemed heightened rather than diminished. His ears reacted to the slightest sound. His step was lighter, quicker, his body lithe and graceful, and he smiled often, his lips curling back from his long, white teeth. Vera Claythorne was very quiet. She sat most of the time huddled in a chair. Her eyes stared ahead of her into space. She looked dazed. She was like a bird that had dashed its head against the glass and that has been picked up by a human hand. It crouches there, terrified, unable to move, hoping to save itself by its immobility. Armstrong was in a pitiable condition of nerves. He twitched, and his hands shook. He lighted cigarette after cigarette and stubbed them out almost immediately. The forced inaction of their position seemed to gall him more than the others. Every now and then he broke out into a torrent of nervous speech. We shouldn't just sit here doing nothing. There must be something. Surely there's something that we can do if we lit a bonfire, Blore said heavily. In this way. The rain was pouring down again. The wind came in fitful gusts. The depressing sound of the pattering rain nearly drove them mad. By tacit consent, they had adopted a plan of campaign. They all sat in the big drawing room, and only one person left the room at a time. The other 4 waited until the 5th returned. Lombard said, "It's only a question of time. The weather will clear. Then we can do something. Signal, light fires, make a raft, something." Armstrong said with a sudden cackle of laughter, "A question of time. Time? We can't afford time. Not if we are careful. We shall all be dead." Justice Wargrave said, and his small, clear voice was heavy with passionate determination. "Not if we are careful. We must be very careful." The midday meal had been duly eaten, but there had been no conventional formality about it. All 5 of them had gone to the kitchen. In the larder, they had found a great store of tinned foods. They opened a tin of tongue and 2 tins of fruit. They had eaten standing round the kitchen table. Then, herding close together, they returned to the drawing room, to sit there. Sit, watching each other. And by now, the thoughts that ran through their brains were abnormal, feverish, diseased. It's Armstrong. Saw him looking at me sideways just then. His eyes are mad. Quite mad. Perhaps he isn't a doctor at all. Watson, of course.
He's a lunatic, escaped from some doctor's house, pretending to be a doctor. It's true. Shall I tell them?
Shall I scream out? No, it won't do to put him on his guard. Besides, he can seem so sane. What time is it? Only 3:15. Oh God, I shall go mad myself. Yes, it's Armstrong. He's watching me now.
They won't get me. I can take care of myself. I've been in tight places before. Where the hell is that revolver? Who took it? Who's got it? Nobody's got it. We know that. We were all searched. Nobody can have it. But someone knows where it is.
They're going mad. They'll all go mad.
Afraid of death. We're all afraid of death. I'm afraid of death.
Yes, but that doesn't stop death coming now, does it?
The hearse is at the door, sir.
Where did I read that? The girl. I'll watch the girl.
Yes, I'll watch the girl.
20 to 4. Only 20 to 4. Perhaps the clock has stopped. I don't understand. No, I don't understand. This sort of thing can't happen. It is happening. Why don't we wake up? Wake up. Judgment Day. No, not that. If I could only think. My head. Something's happening in my head. It's going to burst. It's going to split. This sort of thing can't happen. What's the time? Oh God, it's only 4:15.
Must keep my head. I must keep my head. If only I keep my head. It's all perfectly clear, all worked out, but nobody must suspect. It may do the trick. It must. Which one? That's the question. Which one? I think... Yes, I rather think... Yes, him.
When the clock struck 5, they all jumped. Vera said,
Does anyone want tea?
There was a moment's silence. Blore said, I'd like a cup.
Vera rose. She said, I'll go and make it. You can all stay here.
Mr. Justice Wargrave said gently,
I think, my dear young lady, we would all prefer to come and watch you make it.
Vera stared, then gave a short, rather hysterical laugh.
She said, Of course, you would.
5 people went into the kitchen. Tea was made and drunk by Vera and Blore. The other 3 had whiskey, opening a fresh bottle and using a siphon from a nailed-up case. The judge murmured with a reptilian smile,
We must be very careful.
They went back again to the drawing room. Although it was summer, the room was dark. Lombard switched on the lights, but they did not come on. He said, Of course. The engine's not been run today, since Rogers hasn't been there to see it. He hesitated and said, We could go out and get it going, I suppose. Mr. Justice Wargrave said,
There are packets of candles in the larder. I saw them. Better use those.
Lombard went out. The other 4 sat watching each other. He came back with a box of candles and a pile of saucers. 5 candles were lit and placed about the room. The time was 6:15. At 6:20, Vera felt that to sit there longer was unbearable. She would go to her room and bathe her aching head and temples in cold water. She got up and went towards the door. Then she remembered and came back and got a candle out of the box. She lighted it, let a little wax pour into a saucer, and stuck the candle firmly to it. Then she went out of the room, shutting the door behind her and leaving the 4 men inside. She went up the stairs and along the passage to her room. As she opened her door, she suddenly halted and stood stock still. Her nostrils quivered. The sea. The smell of the sea at St. Tredenick. That was it. She could not be mistaken. Of course, one smelt the sea on an island anyway, but this was different. It was the smell there had been on the beach that day, with the tide out and the rocks covered with seaweed drying in the sun.
Can I swim out to the island, Miss Claythorne? Why can't I swim out to the island?
Horrid, whiny, spoilt little brat. If it weren't for him, Hugo would be rich, able to marry the girl he loved. Hugo. Surely Hugo was beside her. No, waiting for her in the room. She took a step forward. The draft from the window caught the flame of the candle. It flickered and went out. In the dark, she was suddenly afraid.
Don't be a fool, Vera Claythorne urged herself. It's all right. The others are downstairs, all 4 of them. There's no one in the room. There can't be. You're imagining things, my girl.
But that smell of the beach at St. Tredonik, that wasn't imagined. It was true. And there was someone in the room. She had heard something. Surely she had heard something. And then, as she stood there, listening, a cold, clammy hand touched her throat. A wet hand, smelling of the sea. Vera screamed. She screamed and screamed. Screams of the utmost terror, wild, desperate cries for help. She did not hear the sounds from below, of a chair being overturned, of a door opening, of men's feet running up the stairs. She was conscious only of supreme terror. Then, restoring her sanity, lights flickered in the doorway. Candles, men hurrying into the room.
What the devil? What's happened? Good God, what is it?
She shuddered, took a step forward, collapsed on the floor. She was only half aware of someone bending over her, of someone forcing her head down between her knees. Then, at a sudden exclamation, a quick,
"My God, look at that!"
her senses returned. She opened her eyes and raised her head. She saw what it was the men with the candles were looking at. A broad ribbon of wet seaweed was hanging down from the ceiling. It was that which in the darkness had swayed against her throat. It was that which she had taken for a clammy hand, a drowned hand come back from the dead to squeeze the life out of her. She began to laugh hysterically. She said,
It was seaweed. Only seaweed. That's what the smell was.
and then the faintness came over her once more, waves upon waves of sickness. Again someone took her head and forced it between her knees. Eons of time seemed to pass. They were offering her something to drink, pressing the glass against her lips. She smelt brandy. She was just about to gulp the spirit gratefully down when suddenly a warning note, like an alarm bell, sounded in her brain. She sat up, pushing the glass away. She said sharply,
Where did this come from?
Blor's voice answered. He stared a minute before speaking. He said, I got it from downstairs. Vera cried,
I won't drink it.
There was a moment's silence, then Lombard laughed. He said with appreciation, Good for you, Vera. You've got your wits about you, even if you have been scared half out of your life. I'll get a fresh bottle that hasn't been opened. He went swiftly out. Vera said uncertainly,
I'm all right now. I'll have some water.
Armstrong supported her as she struggled to her feet. She went over to the basin, swaying and clutching at him for support. She let the cold tap run and then filled the glass. Blor said resentfully, That brandy's all right. Armstrong said, How do you know? Blor said angrily, I didn't put anything in it, that's what you're getting at, I suppose. Armstrong said, I'm not saying you did. You might have done it, or someone might have tampered with the bottle for just this emergency. Lombard came swiftly back into the room. He had a new bottle of brandy in his hands and a corkscrew. He thrust the sealed bottle under Vera's nose. There you are, my girl. Absolutely no deception. He peeled off the tin foil and drew the cork. Luckily, there's a good supply of spirits in the house. Thoughtful of our UN Owen. Vera shuddered violently. Armstrong held the glass, while Philip poured the brandy into it. He said, "You'd better drink this, Miss Claythorne. You've had a nasty shock." Vera drank a little of the spirit. The color came back to her face. Philip Lombard said with a laugh, "Well, here's one murder that hasn't gone according to plan." Vera said almost in a whisper,
You think that was what that meant?
Lombard nodded. "Expected you to pass out through fright. Some people would have, wouldn't they, Doctor?" Armstrong did not commit himself. He said doubtfully, Impossible to say. Young, healthy subject. No cardiac weaknesses. Unlikely. On the other hand, he picked up the glass of brandy that Blore had brought. He dipped a finger in it, tasted it gingerly. His expression did not alter. He said dubiously, Tastes all right." Blore stepped forward angrily. He said, "If you're saying I tampered with that, I'll knock your ruddy block off." Vera, her wits revived by the brandy, made a diversion by saying,
Where's the judge?
The three men looked at each other. "Well, that's odd. Thought he came up with us," Blore said. "So did I." "What about it, Doctor? You came up the stairs behind me." Armstrong said, "I thought he was following me. Of course, he'd be bound to go slower than we did. He is an old man." They looked at each other again. Lombard said, "It's damn odd." Blore cried, "We must look for him." He started for the door. The others followed him. Vera last. As they went down the stairs, Armstrong said over his shoulder, "Of course, he may have stayed in the living room." They crossed the hall. Armstrong called out loudly, "Wargrave? Wargrave, where are you?" There was no answer. A deadly silence filled the house apart from the gentle patter of the rain. Then, in the entrance to the drawing room door, Armstrong stopped dead. The others crowded up and looked over his shoulder. Somebody cried out. Mr. Justice Wargrave was sitting in his high-backed chair at the end of the room. 2 candles burnt on either side of him. But what shocked and startled the onlookers was the fact that he sat there, robed in scarlet, with a judge's wig upon his head. Dr. Armstrong motioned to the others to keep back. He himself walked across to the silent, staring figure, reeling a little as he walked like a drunken man. He bent forward, peering into the still face. Then, with a swift movement, he raised the wig. It fell to the floor, revealing the high, bald forehead within the very middle of a round, stained mark from which something had trickled. Dr. Armstrong raised the limp hand and felt for the pulse. Then he turned to the others. He said, and his voice was expressionless, "Dead. Far away." "He's been shot," Blore said.
"God, the revolver!"
The doctor said, still in the same lifeless voice, "Got him through the head. Instantaneous." Vera stooped to the wig. She said, and her voice shook with horror,
Miss Brent's missing grey wool."
Blore said, "The scarlet curtain that was missing from the bathroom." Vera whispered,
So, this is what they wanted them for.
Suddenly, Philip Lombard laughed. A high, unnatural laugh. 5 little soldier boys going in for law. 1 got in chancery, and then there were 4. Oh, that's the end of Mr. Bloody Justice Wargrave. No more pronouncing sentences for him. No more putting on the black cap. Here's the last time he'll ever sit in court. No more summing up and sending innocent men to death. Oh, how Edward Sutton would laugh if he were here. God, how he'd laugh. His outburst shocked and startled the others. Vera cried, "Only this morning you said he was the one." Philip Lombard's face changed, sobered. He said in a low voice, "I know I did. Well, I was wrong. Here's one more of us who's been proved innocent. Too late." Chapter 14. They had carried Mr. Justice Wargrave up to his room and laid him on the bed. Then they had come down again and had stood in the hall looking at each other. Blore said heavily, "What do we do now?" Lombard said briskly, "Have something to eat. We've got to eat, you know." Once again they went into the kitchen. Again they opened a tin of tongue. They ate mechanically, almost without tasting. Vera said, "I shall never eat tongue again." They finished the meal. They sat round the kitchen table staring at each other. Blore said, "Only 4 of us now. Who'll be the next?" Armstrong stared. He said, almost mechanically, "We must be very careful," and stopped. Blore nodded.
"That's what he said. And now he's dead."
Armstrong said, "How did it happen, I wonder?" Lombard swore. He said, "Damn clever double-cross. That stuff was planted in Miss Claythorne's room, and it worked just as it was intended to. Everyone dashes up there thinking she's being murdered, and so in the confusion, someone caught the old boy off his guard." Blore said,
"Why didn't anyone hear the shot?"
Lombard shook his head. Miss Claythorne was screaming. The wind was howling. We were running about and calling out. It wouldn't be heard. He paused, but that trick's not going to work again. He'll have to try something else next time. Blore said,
"It probably will."
There was an unpleasant tone in his voice. The 2 men eyed each other. Armstrong said, "4 of us, and we don't know which." Blore said,
"I know."
Vera said,
"I haven't the least doubt."
Armstrong said slowly, "I suppose I do know, really." Philip Lombard said, "I think I've got a pretty good idea now." Again, they all looked at each other. Vera staggered to her feet. She said,
"I feel awful. I must go to bed. I'm dead beat."
Lombard said, "Might as well. No good sitting watching each other." Blore said, "I've no objection." The doctor murmured, "The best thing to do. Although, I doubt if any of us will sleep." They moved to the door. Blore said,
"I wonder where that revolver is now."
"I'm gonna take a second to get some water. I'll be right back, so make sure you also get some water or, take a time to stretch. Give me a sec." Okay, I'm back. They went up the stairs. The next move was a little like a scene in a farce. Each one of the four stood with a hand on his or her bedroom door handle. Then, as though at a signal, each one stepped into the room and pulled the door shut. There were sounds of bolts and locks, of the moving of furniture. 4 frightened people were barricaded in until morning. Philip Lombard drew a breath of relief as he turned from adjusting a chair under the door handle. He strolled across to the dressing table. By the light of the flickering candle, he studied his face curiously. He said softly to himself, "Yes, this business has got you rattled all right." His sudden wolf-like smile flashed out. He undressed quickly. He went over to the bed, placing his wristwatch on the table by the bed. Then he opened the drawer of the table. He stood there, staring down at the revolver that was inside it. Vera Claythorne lay in bed. The candle still burned beside her, and yet she could not summon the courage to put it out. She was afraid of the dark. She told herself again and again, "You're all right until morning. Nothing happened last night. Nothing will happen tonight. Nothing can happen. You're locked and bolted in. No one can come near you." And she thought suddenly, "Of course, I can stay here. Stay here locked in. Food doesn't really matter. I can stay here, safely till help comes, even if it's a day, or 2 days." Stay here, yes. But could she stay here, hour after hour, with no one to speak to, with nothing to do but think? She'd begin to think of Cornwall, of Hugo, of what she'd said to Cyril. Horrid, whiny little boy, always pestering her.
"Miss Claythorne, why can't I swim out to the rock? I can, I know I can."
Was it her voice that had answered?
"Of course you can, Cyril. Really, I know that. Can I go then, Miss Claythorne?" "Well, you see, Cyril, your mother gets so nervous about you. I'll tell you what. Tomorrow you can swim out to the rock. I'll talk to your mother on the beach and distract her attention. And then, when she looks for you, there you'll be standing on the rock waving to her. It will be a surprise." "Oh, good egg, Miss Claythorne. That will be a lark."
She'd said it now. Tomorrow. Hugo was going to Newquay. When he came back, it would all be over. Yes, but supposing it wasn't. Supposing it went wrong. Cyril might be rescued in time. And then he'd say,
"Miss Claythorne said I could."
well, what of it? One must take some risk. If the worst happened, she'd brazen it out.
"How can you tell such a wicked lie, Cyril? Of course I never said any such thing."
They'd believe her, all right. Cyril often told stories. He was an untruthful child. Cyril would know, of course, but that didn't matter. And anyway, nothing would go wrong. She'd pretend to swim out after him. But she'd arrive too late. Nobody would ever suspect. Had Hugo suspected? Was that why he had looked at her in that queer, far-off way? Had Hugo known? Was that why he had gone off after the inquest so hurriedly? He hadn't answered the one letter she had written to him. Hugo. Vera turned restlessly in bed. No, she mustn't think of Hugo. It hurt too much. That was all over and done with. Hugo must be forgotten. Why, this evening, had she suddenly felt that Hugo was in the room with her? She stared up at the ceiling, stared at the big black hook in the middle of the room. She never noticed that hook before. The seaweed had hung from that. She shivered as she remembered that cold, clammy touch on her neck. She didn't like that hook on the ceiling. It drew your eyes, fascinated you. A big black hook. Ex-Inspector Bloor sat on the side of his bed. His small eyes, red-rimmed and bloodshot, were alert in the solid mass of his face. He was like a wild boar waiting to charge. He felt no inclination to sleep. The menace was coming very clear now. 6 out of 10. For all of his sagacity, for all of his caution and astuteness, the old judge had gone the way of the rest. Bloor snorted with a kind of savage satisfaction. What was it the old geezer has said?
We must be very careful.
Self-righteous, smug old hypocrite. Sitting up in court feeling like God Almighty. Well, he'd got his all right. No more being careful for him. And now there were 4 of them. The girl, Lombard, Armstrong, and himself. Very soon another of them would go, but it wouldn't be William Henry Bloor. He'd see to that all right. But the revolver. What about the revolver? That was the disturbing factor. The revolver. Bloor sat on his bed, his brow furrowed, his little eyes creased and puckered while he pondered the problem of the revolver. In the silence, he could hear the clock strike downstairs. Midnight. He relaxed a little now, even went so far as to lie down on his bed. But he did not undress. He lay there, thinking. Going over the whole business from the beginning, methodically, painstakingly as he had been wont to do in his police officer days. It was thoroughness that paid in the end. The candle was burning down. Looking to see if the matches were within easy reach of his hand, he blew it out. Strangely enough, he found the darkness disquieting. It was as though 1,000 age-old fears awoke and struggled for supremacy in his brain. Faces floated in the air. The judge's face, crowned with that mockery of gray wool, the cold, dead face of Mrs. Rogers, the convulsed purple face of Anthony Marston, another face, pale, spectacled with a small, straw-colored mustache, a face he had seen sometime or other, but when? Not on the island. No, much longer ago than that. Funny that he couldn't put a name to it. Silly sort of face, really. Fellow looked a bit of a mug. Of course. It came to him with a real shock. Landor. Odd to think he'd completely forgotten what Landor looked like. Only yesterday he'd been trying to recall the fellow's face and hadn't been able to. And now here it was, every feature clear and distinct as though he had seen it only yesterday. Landor had had a wife, a thin slip of a woman with a worried face. There'd been a kid too, a girl about 14. For the first time he wondered what had become of them. The revolver. What had become of the revolver? That was much more important. The more he thought about it, the more puzzled he was. He didn't understand this revolver business. Somebody in the house had got that revolver. Downstairs, a clock struck 1. Bloor's thoughts were cut short. He sat up on the bed, suddenly alert. For he had heard a sound, a very faint sound, somewhere outside his bedroom door. There was someone moving about in the darkened house. The perspiration broke out on his forehead. Who was it moving secretly and silently along the corridors? Someone who was up to no good, he'd bet that. Noiselessly, in spite of his heavy build, he dropped off the bed and with 2 strides was standing by the door listening. But the sound did not come again. Nevertheless, Bloor was convinced he was not mistaken. He had heard a footfall just outside his door. The hair rose slightly on his scalp. He knew fear again. Someone creeping about stealthily in the night. He listened, but the sound was not repeated. And now a new temptation assailed him. He wanted desperately to go out and investigate. If he could only see who it was prowling about in the darkness. But to open his door would be the action of a fool. Very likely that was exactly what the other was waiting for. He might even have meant Blore to hear what he had heard, counting on him coming out to investigate. Blore stood rigid, listening. He could hear sounds everywhere now. Cracks, rustles, mysterious whispers. But his dogged, realistic brain knew them for what they were. The creations of his own heated imagination. And then, suddenly, he heard something that was not imagination. Footsteps, very soft, very cautious, but plainly audible to a man listening with all his ears as Blore was listening. They came softly along the corridor. Both Lombard's and Armstrong's rooms were further from the stairhead than his. They passed his door without hesitating or faltering, and as they did so, Blore made up his mind. He meant to see who it was. The footsteps had definitely passed his door going to the stairs. Where was the man going? When Blore acted, he acted quickly, surprisingly so for a man who looked so heavy and slow. He tiptoed back to the bed, slipped matches into his pocket, detached the plug of the electric lamp by his bed, and picked it up, winding the flex round it. It was a chromium affair with a heavy ebonite base, a useful weapon. He sprinted noiselessly across the room, removed the chair from under the door handle, and with precaution, unlocked and unbolted the door. He stepped out into the corridor. There was a faint sound in the hall below. Blore ran noiselessly in his stockinged feet to the head of the stairs. At that moment, he realized why it was he had heard all these sounds so clearly. The wind had died down completely, and the sky must have cleared. There was faint moonlight coming in through the landing window, and it illuminated the hall below. Blore had an instantaneous glimpse of a figure just passing out through the front door. In the act of running down the stairs in pursuit, he paused. Once again, he had nearly made a fool of himself. This was a trap, perhaps, to lure him out of the house. But what the other man didn't realize was that he had made a mistake, had delivered himself neatly into Blore's hands. For of the 3 tenanted rooms upstairs, one must now be empty. All that had to be done was to ascertain which. Blore went swiftly back along the corridor. He paused first at Dr. Armstrong's door and tapped. There was no answer. He waited a minute, then went on to Philip Lombard's room. Here the answer came at once.
Who's there? It's Blore. I don't think Armstrong's in his room. Wait a minute.
He went on to the door at the end of the corridor. Here he tapped again.
Miss Claythorne? Miss Claythorne?
Vera's voice, startled, answered him.
Who is it? What's the matter?
It's all right, Miss Claythorne. Wait a minute. I'll come back.
He raced back to Lombard's room. The door opened as he did so. Lombard stood there. He held a candle in his left hand. He had pulled on his trousers over his pajamas. His right hand rested in the pocket of his pajama jacket. He said sharply, "What the hell's all this?" Blore explained rapidly. Lombard's eyes lit up.
Armstrong, eh?
So, he's our pigeon. He moved along to Armstrong's door. Sorry, Blore, but I don't take anything on trust. He rapped sharply on the panel. Armstrong? Armstrong. There was no answer. Lombard dropped to his knees and peered through the keyhole. He inserted his little finger gingerly into the lock. He said, "Key's not in the lock on the door on the inside." Blore said,
That means he's locked it from the outside and took it with him.
Philip nodded. Ordinary precaution to take. We'll get him, Blore. This time we'll get him. Half a second. He raced along to Vera's room. Vera?
Yes?
We're hunting Armstrong. He's out of his room. Whatever you do, don't open your door. Understand?
Yes, I understand.
If Armstrong comes along and says I've been killed or that Blore's been killed, pay no attention. See? Only open your door if both Blore and I speak to you. Got that? Vera said.
Yes, I'm not a complete fool.
Lombard said. Good. He joined Blore. He said, and now, after him.
The hunt's up.
Blore said,
We'd better be careful.
He's got a revolver, remember? Philip Lombard, racing down the stairs, chuckled. He said, "That's where you're wrong." He undid the front door, remarking, "Latch pushed back so that he could get in again easily." He went on, "I've got the revolver." He took it half out of his pocket as he spoke. "Found it put back in my drawer tonight." Blore stopped dead on the doorstep. His face changed. Philip Lombard saw it. He said impatiently, "Don't be a damn fool, Blore. I'm not going to shoot you. Go back and barricade yourself in if you like. I'm off after Armstrong." He started off into the moonlight. Blore, after a minute's hesitation, followed him. He thought to himself, "Suppose I'm asking for it, but after all, he had tackled criminals armed with revolvers before now. Whatever else he lacked, Blore did not lack courage. Show him the danger, and he would tackle it, pluckily. He was not afraid of danger in the open, only of danger undefined and tinged with the supernatural. Vera, left to wait results, got up and dressed. She glanced over once or twice at the door. It was a good solid door. It was both bolted and locked and had an oak chair wedged under the handle. It could not be broken open by force. Certainly not by Dr. Armstrong. He was not a physically powerful man. If she were Armstrong intent on murder, it was cunning that she would employ, not force. She amused herself by reflecting on the means he might employ. He might, as Philip had suggested, announce that one of the other two men was dead. Or he might possibly pretend to be mortally wounded himself, might drag himself groaning to her door. There were other possibilities. He might inform her that the house was on fire. More, he might actually set the house on fire. Yes, that would be a possibility. Lure the other two men out of the house, then, having previously laid a trail of petrol, might set light to it. And she, like an idiot, would remain barricaded in her room until it was too late. She crossed over to the window. Not too bad. At a pinch, one could escape that way. It would mean a drop, but there was a handy flower bed. She sat down and, picking up her diary, began to write in it in a clear, flowing hand. One must pass the time. Suddenly, she stiffened to attention. She had heard a sound. It was, she thought, a sound like breaking glass, and it came from somewhere downstairs. She listened hard, but the sound was not repeated. She heard, or thought she heard, sounds of footsteps, the creak of stairs, the rustle of garments, but there was nothing definite, and she concluded, as Blore had done earlier, that such sounds had their origin in her own imagination. But presently she heard sounds of a more concrete nature, people moving about downstairs, the murmur of voices, then the very decided sound of someone mounting the stairs, doors opening and shutting, feet going up into the attic overhead, more noises from there. Finally the steps came along the passage. Lombard's voice said, "Vera, you all right?"
Yes, what's happened?
Blore's voice said.
"Will you let us in?"
Vera went to the door. She removed the chair, unlocked the door, and slid back the bolt. She opened the door. The two men were breathing hard, their feet and the bottom of their trousers soaking wet. She said again,
What's happened?
Lombard said,
"Armstrong's disappeared."
Vera cried.
What?
Lombard said, "Vanished clean off the island." Blore concurred.
"Vanished? Well, that's the word. Like some damn conjuring trick."
Vera said impatiently,
Nonsense, he's hiding somewhere.
Blore said,
"No, he isn't. I tell you, there's nowhere to hide on this island. It's as bare as your hand. There's moonlight outside, as clear as day it is, and he's not to be found."
Vera said,
He doubled back into the house.
Blore said,
We thought of that. We've searched the house too. He must have heard us. Well, he's not here, I tell you. He's gone. Clean vanished. Vamoosed."
Vera said incredulously,
I don't believe it.
Lombard said, "It's true, my dear." He paused and then said, "There's one other little fact." A pane in the dining room window has been smashed. And there are only 3 little soldier boys on the table. Chapter 15. 3 people sat eating breakfast in the kitchen. Outside, the sun shone. It was a lovely day. The storm was a thing of the past, and with the change in the weather, a change had come in the mood of the prisoners on the island. They felt now like people just awakening from a nightmare. There was danger, yes, but it was danger in daylight. That paralyzing atmosphere of fear that had wrapped them round like a blanket yesterday while the wind howled outside was gone. Lombard said, "We'll try heliographing today with a mirror from the highest point of the island. Some bright lad wandering on the cliff will recognize SOS when he sees it. I hope. In the evening we could try a bonfire, only there isn't much wood. And anyway, they might just think it was song and dance and merriment."
Vera said, "Surely someone can read Morse, and then they'll come to take us off. Long before this evening."
Lombard said, "The weather's cleared all right, but the sea hasn't gone down yet. Terrific swell on. They won't be able to get a boat near the island before tomorrow."
Vera cried, "Another night in this place?"
Lombard shrugged his shoulders. "May as well face it. 24 hours will do it, I think. If we can last out that, we'll be all right."
Oh, hi Lebby, by the way, welcome in. Good to see you. Hope you're enjoying the story. Blore cleared his throat. He said,
"We'd better come to a clear understanding. What's happened to Armstrong?" Lombard said, "Well, we've got one piece of evidence. Only 3 little soldier boys left on the dinner table. It looks as though Armstrong got his quietus."
Vera said, "Then why haven't you found his dead body?"
Blore said, "Exactly." Lombard shook his head. He said, "It's damn odd. No getting over it." Blore said doubtfully, "Might have been thrown into the sea?" Lombard said sharply, "By whom? You? Me? You saw him go out the front door. You come along and find me in my room. We go out and search together. When the devil had I time to kill him and carry his body round the island?" Blore said, "I don't know, but I do know one thing." Lombard said, "What's that?"
Blore said,
"The revolver. It was your revolver. It's in your possession now. There's nothing to show that it hasn't been in your possession all along. Come now, Blore, we were all searched." "Well, yes, you'd hidden it away before that happened. Afterwards, you just took it back out again." "My good blockhead, I swear to you that it was put back in my drawer. Greatest surprise I ever had in my life when I found it there."
Blore said,
"You ask us to believe a thing like that? Why the devil should Armstrong, or anyone else for that matter, put it back?"
Lombard raised his shoulders hopelessly. "I haven't the least idea. It's just crazy."
"The last thing one would expect. There seems no point in it."
Blore agreed.
"No, there isn't. You might have thought of a better story. Rather proof that I'm telling the truth, isn't it?" "Well, I don't look at it that way."
Philip said, "You wouldn't."
Blore said, "Look here, Mr. Lombard, if you're an honest man, as you pretend—"
Philip murmured, "When did I lay claims to being an honest man? No, indeed, I never said that."
Blore went on stolidly, "Well, if you're speaking the truth, there's only one thing to be done. As long as you have that revolver, Miss Claythorne and I are at your mercy. The only fair thing is to put that revolver with the other things that are locked up, and you and I will hold the 2 keys still."
Philip Lombard lit a cigarette. As he puffed smoke, he said,
"Don't be an ass. You won't agree to that?"
"No, I won't. That revolver's mine. I need it to defend myself, and I'm gonna keep it."
Blore said, "Well, in that case, we're bound to come to one conclusion."
"That I'm you and Owen? Think what you damn well please, but I'll ask you, if that's so,
Why didn't I pot you with that revolver last night? I could have about 20 times over. Blore shook his head. He said, I don't know. Well, that's a fact. You must have had some reason. Vera had taken no part in the discussion. She stirred now and said,
I think you're both behaving like a pair of idiots.
Lombard looked at her. What's this?
Vera said, You've forgotten the nursery rhyme. Don't you see there's a clue there?
She recited in a meaning voice,
4 little soldier boys going out to sea. A red herring swallowed one, and then there were 3.
She went on,
A red herring, that's the vital clue. Armstrong's not dead. He took away the China soldier to make you think he was. You may say what you like, Armstrong's on the island still. His disappearance is just a red herring across the track.
Lombard sat down again. He said, You know, you may be right. Blore said, Yes, but if so, where is he? We've searched the place outside and inside.
Vera said scornfully, We all searched for the revolver, didn't we, and couldn't find it, but it was somewhere all the time.
Lombard murmured, There's a slight difference in size, my dear, between a man and a revolver.
Vera said, I don't care, I'm sure I'm right.
Blore murmured, Rather giving himself away, wasn't it? Actually mentioning a red herring in the verse. He could have written it up a bit different.
Vera cried, But don't you see? He's mad. It's all mad. That whole thing of going by the rhyme is mad. Dressing up the judge, killing Rogers when he was chopping sticks, drugging Mrs. Rogers so that she overslept herself, arranging for a bumblebee when Miss Brent died. It's like some horrible child playing a game. It's all got to fit in.
Blore said, Well, yes, you're right. He thought a minute. At any rate, there's no zoo on the island. You'll have a bit of trouble getting over that.
Vera cried, Don't you see? We're the zoo. Last night we were hardly human anymore. We're the zoo. They spent the morning on the cliffs, taking it in turns to flash a mirror at the mainland. There were no signs that anyone saw them, no answering signals. The day was fine, with a slight haze. Below, the sea heaved in a gigantic swell. There were no boats out. They had made another abortive search of the island. There was no trace of the missing physician. Vera looked up at the house from where they were standing. She said, her breath coming up with a slight catch to it, One feels safer here out in the open. Don't let's go back into the house again.
Lombard said, Not a bad idea. We're pretty safe here. No one can get at us without our seeing him a long time beforehand.
Vera said, We'll stay here.
Blore said, Have to pass the night somewhere. We'll have to go back to the house then.
Vera shuddered. I can't bear it. I can't go through another night.
Philip said, You'll be safe enough. Locked in your room.
Vera murmured, I suppose so. She stretched out her hands, murmuring, It's lovely to feel the sun again. She thought, How odd. I'm almost happy, and yet I suppose I'm actually in danger. Somehow, now, nothing seems to matter. Not in daylight. I feel full of power. I feel that I can't die.
Blore was looking at his wristwatch. He said, It's 2 o'clock. What about lunch?
Vera said obstinately, I'm not going back into the house. I'm going to stay here in the open.
Oh, come now, Miss Claythorne. Gotta keep your strength up, you know.
Vera said, If I even see a tinned tongue, I shall be sick. I don't want any food. People go days on end with nothing sometimes when they're on a diet.
Blore said, Well, I need my meals regular. What about you, Mr. Lombard? Philip said, You know, I don't relish the idea of tinned tongue particularly. I'll stay here with Miss Claythorne. Blore hesitated. Vera said, I shall be quite all right. I don't think he'll shoot me as soon as your back is turned, if that's what you're afraid of. Blore said, It's all right if you say so, but we agreed we ought not separate. Philip said, You're the one who wants to go into the lion's den. I'll come with you if you like. No, you won't, said Blore. You'll stay here. Philip laughed. So you're still afraid of me? Why, I could shoot you both this minute if I liked. Blore said, Well, yes, but that wouldn't be according to plan. So one at a time, and it's got to be done a certain way. Well, said Philip, you seem to know all about it. Well, of course, said Blore. It's a bit jumpy going up to the house alone. Philip said softly, And therefore, will I lend you my revolver? Answer, No, I will not. Not quite so simple as that, thank you. Blore shrugged his shoulders and began to make his way up the steep slope to the house. Lombard said softly, Feeding time at the zoo. The animals are very regular in their habits. Vera said anxiously, Isn't it very risky, what he's doing? In the sense you mean? No, I don't think it is. Armstrong's not armed, you know, and anyway, Blore is twice a match for him in physique, and he's very much on his guard. And anyway, it's a sheer impossibility that Armstrong can be in the house. I know he's not there. But what other solution is there? Philip said softly, There's Blore. Oh, do you really think? Listen, my girl. You heard Blore's story. You've got to admit, if it's true, I can't possibly have had anything to do with Armstrong's disappearance. We've only his word for it that he heard footsteps and saw a man going downstairs and out at the front door. The whole thing may be a lie. He may have got rid of Armstrong a couple of hours before that. How? Lombard shrugged his shoulders. That we don't know. But if you ask me, we've only one danger to face, and that danger is Blore. What do we know about the man? Less than nothing. All this ex-policeman story may be bunkum. He may be anybody. A mad millionaire. A crazy businessman. An escaped inmate of Broadmoor. One thing's certain. He could have done every one of those crimes. Vera had gone rather white. She said in a slightly breathless voice, And supposing he gets us? Lombard said softly, patting the revolver in his pocket. I'm going to take very good care he doesn't. Then he looked at her curiously. Touching faith in me, haven't you, Vera? Quite sure I wouldn't shoot you. Vera said, One has got to trust someone. As a matter of fact, I think you're wrong about Blore. I still think it's Armstrong. She turned to him suddenly. Don't you feel, all the time, that there's someone watching and waiting? Lombard said slowly, That's just nerves. Vera said eagerly, Then you have felt it. She shivered. She bent a little closer. Tell me, you don't think... She broke off, went on. I read a story once about two judges that came to a small American town from the Supreme Court. They administered justice. Absolute justice. Because they didn't come from this world at all. Lombard raised his eyebrows. He said, Heavenly visitants, eh? No, I don't believe in the supernatural. This business is human enough. Vera said in a low voice, Sometimes, I'm not sure. Lombard looked at her. He said, That's conscience. After a moment's silence, he said very gently, So you did drown that kid after all.
I didn't. You've got no right to say that.
He laughed easily. Oh, yes, you did, my good girl. I don't know why. Can't imagine. There was a man in it, probably. Was that it? A sudden feeling of lassitude, of intense weariness, spread over Vera's limbs. She said in a dull voice,
Yes, there was a man in it.
Lombard said softly, Thanks. That's what I wanted to know. Vera sat up suddenly. She exclaimed,
What was that? Wasn't it an earthquake?
Lombard said, No, no. Queer, though. A thud shook the ground, and I thought, Did you hear her sort of cry? I did. They stared up at the house. Lombard said, It came from there. We better grow up and see.
No, I'm not going.
Please yourself. I am. Vera said desperately.
All right, I'll come with you.
They walked up the slope to the house. The terrace was peaceful and innocuous looking in the sunshine. They hesitated there a minute. Then, instead of entering by the front door, they made a cautious circuit of the house. They found Blore. He was spread-eagled on the stone terrace of the east side, his head crushed and mangled by a great block of white marble. Philip looked up. He said, Whose is that window just above? Vera said in a low, shuddering voice,
It's mine, and that's the clock from my mantelpiece. I remember now. It was shaped like a bear.
She repeated, and her voice shook and quavered.
It was shaped like a bear.
Philip grasped her shoulder. He said, and his voice was urgent and grim, This settles it. Armstrong is in hiding somewhere in that house. I'm going to get him. But Vera clung to him. She cried,
Don't be a fool. It's us now. We're next. He wants us to look for him. He's counting on it.
Philip stopped. He said thoughtfully, There's something in that. Vera cried,
At any rate, you do admit now I was right.
He nodded. Yes, you win. It's Armstrong, all right, but where the devil did he hide himself? We went over the place with a fine-tooth comb. Vera said urgently,
If you didn't find him last night, you won't find him now. That's common sense.
Lombard said reluctantly, Yes, but
he must have prepared a secret place beforehand. Naturally. Of course, it's just what he would do. You know, like a priest's hole in old manor houses.
This isn't an old house of that kind.
He could have had one made.
Philip Lombard shook his head. He said, We measured the place that first morning. I'll swear there's no space unaccounted for.
Vera said, There must be.
Lombard said, I'd like to see.
Vera cried, Yes, you'd like to see. And he knows that. He's in there, waiting for you.
Lombard said, half bringing out the revolver from his pocket. I've got this, you know.
You said Blore was all right, that he was more than a match for Armstrong. So he was, physically, and he was on the lookout too. But what you don't seem to realize is that Armstrong is mad, and a madman has all the advantages on his side. He's twice as cunning as anyone sane can be.
Lombard put back the revolver in his pocket. He said, Come on then. Lombard said at last, What are we going to do when night comes? Vera didn't answer. He went on accusingly, You haven't thought of that? She said helplessly,
What can we do? Oh my God, I'm frightened.
Philip said thoughtfully, It's fine weather. There will be a moon. We must find a place. Up by the top cliffs, perhaps. We can sit there and wait for the morning. We mustn't go to sleep. We must watch the whole time, and if anyone comes up towards us, I shall shoot. He paused. You'll be cold, perhaps, in that thin dress? Vera said with a raucous laugh.
Cold? I should be colder if I were dead.
Philip Lombard said quietly. Yes, that's true. Vera moved restlessly. She said,
I shall go mad if I sit here any longer. Let's move about.
"All right." They paced slowly up and down along the lines of the rocks overlooking the sea. The sun was dropping toward the west. The light was golden and mellow. It enveloped them in a golden glow. Vera said with a sudden nervous little giggle,
Pity we can't have a bathe.
Philip was looking down toward the sea. He said abruptly, "What's that there? You see, by that big rock? No, a little further to the right." Vera stared. She said,
It looks like somebody's clothes.
"A bather, eh?" Lombard laughed. "Queer. I suppose it's only seaweed." Vera said,
Let's go and look.
"It is clothes," said Lombard as they drew nearer. "A bundle of them. That's a boot. Come on, let's scramble along here." They scrambled over the rocks. Vera stopped suddenly. She said,
It's not clothes. It's a man.
The man was wedged between two rocks, flung there by the tide earlier in the day. Lombard and Vera reached it in a last scramble. They bent down. A purple, discolored face. A hideous, drowned face. Lombard said, "My God, it's Armstrong." Chapter 16. Eons passed. Worlds spun and whirled. Time was motionless. It stood still. It passed through 1,000 ages. No, it was only a minute or so. Two people were staring down at a dead man. Slowly, very slowly, Vera Claythorne and Philip Lombard lifted their heads and looked into each other's eyes. Lombard laughed. He said, "So that's it, is it, Vera?" Vera said,
There's no one on the island. No one at all. Except us two.
Her voice was a whisper, nothing more. Lombard said, "Precisely. So we know where we are, don't we?"
Vera said, How was it worked? That trick with the marble bear?
He shrugged his shoulders. "Conjuring trick, my dear. Very good one." Their eyes met again. Vera thought,
Why did I never see his face properly before? A wolf. That's what it is. A wolf's face. Those horrible teeth.
Lombard said, and his voice was a snarl. Dangerous. Menacing. "This is the end, you understand. We've come to the truth now. And it's the end." Vera said quietly,
I understand.
She stared out to sea. General MacArthur had stared out to sea. When? Only yesterday. Or was it the day before? He too has said, "This is the end." He had said it with acceptance, almost with welcome. But to Vera, the words, the thought, brought rebellion. No, it should not be the end. She looked down at the dead man. She said,
Poor Dr. Armstrong.
Lombard sneered. "What's this? Womanly pity?" Vera said,
Why not? Haven't you any pity?
He said, "I've no pity for you. Don't expect it." Vera looked down again at the body. She said,
We must move him. Carry him up to the house.
"To join the other victims, I suppose? All neat and tidy." As far as I'm concerned, he can stay where he is.
Vera said, "At any rate, let's get him out of reach of the sea."
Lombard laughed. He said, If you like. He bent, tugging at the body. Vera leaned against him, helping him. She pulled and tugged with all her might. Lombard panted.
Not such an easy job.
They managed it, however, drawing the body clear of high water mark. Lombard said as he straightened up. Satisfied?
Vera said, "Quite."
Her tone warned him. He spun round. Even as he clapped his hand to his pocket, he knew that he would find it empty. She had moved a yard or two away and was facing him, revolver in hand. Lombard said, So that's the reason for your womanly solicitude. You wanted to pick my pocket. She nodded. She held it steadily and unwaveringly. Death was very near to Philip Lombard now. It had never, he knew, been nearer. Nevertheless, he was not beaten yet. He said authoritatively, Give that revolver to me. Vera laughed. Lombard said, Come on. Hand it over. His quick brain was working. Which way? Which method? Talk her over? Lull her into security? Or a swift dash? All his life, Lombard had taken the risky way. He took it now. He spoke slowly, argumentatively. Now, look here, my dear girl. You just listen. And then he sprang, quick as a panther, as any other feline creature. Automatically, Vera pressed the trigger. Lombard's leaping body stayed poised in mid-spring, then crashed heavily to the ground. Vera came wearily forward, the revolver ready in her hand. But there was no need of caution. Philip Lombard was dead. Shot through the heart. Relief possessed Vera. Enormous, exquisite relief. At last, it was over. There was no more fear, no more steeling of her nerves. She was alone on the island. Alone with 9 dead bodies. But what did that matter? She was alive. She sat there, exquisitely happy, exquisitely at peace. No more fear. The sun was setting when Vera moved at last. Sheer reaction had kept her immobile. There had been no room in her for anything but the glorious sense of safety. She realized now that she was hungry and sleepy. Principally sleepy. She wanted to throw herself on her bed and sleep and sleep and sleep. Tomorrow perhaps they would come and rescue her. But she didn't really mind. She didn't mind staying here. Not now that she was alone. Ah, blessed, blessed peace. She got to her feet and glanced up at the house. Nothing to be afraid of any longer. No terrors waiting for her. Just an ordinary, well-built, modern house. And yet, a little earlier in the day, she had not been able to look at it without shivering. Fear. What a strange thing fear was. Well, it was over now. She had conquered, had triumphed over the most deadly peril. By her own quick-wittedness and adroitness, she had turned the tables on her would-be destroyer. She began to walk up toward the house. The sun was setting. The sky to the west was streaked with red and orange. It was beautiful and peaceful. Vera thought the whole thing might be a dream. How tired she was. Terribly tired. Her limbs ached. Her eyelids were drooping. Not to be afraid anymore. To sleep. 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 To sleep safely, since she was alone on the island. One little soldier left all alone. She smiled to herself. She went in at the front door. The house, too, felt strangely peaceful. Vera thought, ordinarily, one wouldn't care to sleep when there's a dead body in practically every bedroom. Should she go to the kitchen and get herself something to eat? She hesitated a moment, then decided against it. She was really too tired. She paused by the dining room door. There were still 3 little china figures in the middle of the table. Vera laughed. She said, "You're behind the times, my dears." She picked up 2 of them and tossed them out through the window. She heard them crash on the stone of the terrace. The 3rd little figure she picked up and held in her hand. She said, "You can come with me. We've won, my dear. We've won." The hall was dim in the dying light. Vera, the little figure clasped in her hand, began to mount the stairs. Slowly, however, because her legs were suddenly very tired. One little soldier boy left all alone. How did it end? Oh, yes. He got married, and then there were none. Married. Funny how she suddenly got the feeling again that Hugo was in the house. Very strong. Yes, Hugo was upstairs waiting for her. Vera said to herself, "Don't be a fool. You're so tired that you're imagining the most fantastic things." Slowly up the stairs. At the top of them, something fell from her hand, making hardly any noise on the soft pile carpet. She didn't notice that she dropped the revolver. She was only conscious of clasping onto a little china figure. How very quiet the house was. And yet, it didn't seem like an empty house. Hugo, upstairs, waiting for her. One little soldier boy left all alone. What was the last line again? Something about being married? Was it something else? She had come now to the door of her room. Hugo was waiting for her inside. She was quite sure of it. She opened the door. She gave a gasp. What was that? Hanging from the hook in the ceiling. A rope? With a noose. Already? And a chair to stand upon. A chair that could be kicked away. That was what Hugo wanted. Ah, of course. That was the last line of the rhyme. He went and hanged himself. And then there were none. The little china figure fell from her hand. It rolled, unheeded, and broke against the fender. Like an automaton, Vera moved forward. This was the end. Here. where the cold, wet hand, Cyril's, of course, had touched her throat.
You can go to the rock, Cyril.
That was what murder was. As easy as that. But afterwards, you went on remembering. She climbed up on the chair, her eyes staring in front of her like a sleepwalker's. She adjusted the noose round her neck. Hugo was there to see that she did what she had to do. She kicked away the chair. Epilogue. Sir Thomas Legg, Assistant Commissioner at Scotland Yard, said irritably,
But the whole thing's incredible.
Inspector Maine said respectfully, I know, sir. The Assistant Commissioner went on.
10 people dead on an island and not a living soul on it. Well, it doesn't make sense.
Inspector Maine said stolidly,
Nevertheless, it happened, sir.
Sir Thomas Legg said.
Damn it all, Maine. Somebody must have killed him. Well, that's just our problem, sir. Nothing helpful in the doctor's report. No, sir. Walgrave and Lombard were shot. The first through the head, the second through the heart. Miss Brent and Marston died of cyanide poisoning. Mrs. Rogers died of an overdose of chloral. Rogers' head was split open. Blore's head was crushed in. Armstrong died of drowning. MacArthur's skull was fractured by a blow in the back of the head, and Vera Claythorne was hanged.
The AC winced. He said,
Nasty business, all of it.
He considered for a minute or two. He said irritably,
Do you mean to say that you haven't been able to get anything helpful out of the Sticklehaven people? Dash it, they must know something.
Inspector Maine shrugged his shoulders. They're ordinary, decent seafaring folk. They know that the island was bought by a man called Owen, and that's about all they do know.
Who provisioned the island and made all the necessary arrangements?
A man called Morris. Isaac Morris.
What does he say about it all?
He can't say anything, sir. He's dead. The AC frowned.
Do we know anything about this Morris?
Oh, yes, sir. We know about him. He was a very savory gentleman, Mr. Morris. He was implicated in that share-pushing fraud of Benito's 3 years ago. We're sure of that, though we can't prove it. And he was mixed up in the dope business. Again, we can't prove it. He was a very careful man, Morris.
And he was behind this island business?
Oh, yes, sir. He put through the sale. Though he made it clear that he was buying Soldier Island for a third party, unnamed.
Surely there's something to be found out on the financial angle there.
Inspector Maine smiled. Not if you knew Morris. He can wangle figures until the best chartered accountant in the country wouldn't know if he was on his head or his heels. We've had a taste of that in the Benito business. No, he covered his employer's tracks all right. The other man sighed. Inspector Maine went on. It was Morris who made all the arrangements down at Sticklehaven, represented himself as acting for Mr. Owen, and it was he who explained to the people down there was some experiment on. There's some bet about living on a desert island for a week, and that no notice was to be taken of any appeal for help from out there. Sir Thomas Legg stirred uneasily. He said,
And you're telling me that those people didn't smell a rat? Not even then?
Maine shrugged his shoulders. He said, You're forgetting, sir, that Soldier Island previously belonged to young Elmer Robson, the American. He had the most extraordinary parties down there. I've no doubt the local people's eyes fairly popped out over them, but they got used to it and they'd begun to feel that anything to do with Soldier Island would necessarily be incredible. It's natural that, sir, when you come to think of it. The Assistant Commissioner admitted gloomily that he supposed it was. Maine said, Fred Narracott, that's the man who took the party out there, did say one thing that was illuminating. He said he was surprised to see what sort of people these were. Not at all like Mr. Robson's parties. I think it was the fact that they were all so normal and so quiet that made him override Morris's orders and take out a boat to the island after he heard about the SOS signals.
When did he and the other men go?
The signals were seen by a party of Boy Scouts the morning of the 11th. There was no possibility of getting out there that day. The men got out there on the afternoon of the 12th at the first moment possible to run a boat ashore there. They're all quite positive that nobody could have left the island before they got there. There was a big sea on after the storm.
Couldn't someone have swum ashore?
It's over a mile to the coast, and there were heavy seas and big breakers inshore. There were lots of people, Boy Scouts and others on the cliffs looking out towards the island and watching. The assistant commissioner sighed. He said,
What about that gramophone record you found in the house? Couldn't you get hold of anything there that might help?
Inspector Main said, "Oh, I've been into that. It was supplied by a firm that does a lot of theatrical stuff and film effects. It was sent to U.N. Owen, Esquire, courtesy of Isaac Morris, and was understood to be required for an amateur performance of a hitherto unacted play. The typescript of it was returned with the record." Legg said,
And what about the subject matter, eh?
Inspector Main said gravely, "I'm coming to that, sir." He cleared his throat. "I've investigated these accusations as thoroughly as I can, starting with the Rogerses, who were the first to arrive on the island. They were in service with a Miss Brady, who died suddenly. Can't get anything definite out of the doctor who attended her. He says they certainly didn't poison her or anything like that, but his personal belief is that there was some funny business, as she died as a result of neglect on their part. Says it's the sort of thing that's quite impossible to prove. Then there is Mr. Justice Walgrave. Oh, that's okay. He was the judge who sent his Seton. By the way, Seton was guilty, unmistakably guilty. Evidence turned up later after he was hanged, which proved that beyond any shadow of doubt. But there was a good deal of comment at the time. 9 people out of 10 thought Seton was innocent and that the judge's summing up had been vindictive. The Clayton girl, I find, was governess in a family where a death occurred by drowning. However, she doesn't seem to have had anything to do with it, and as a matter of fact, she behaved very well, swam out to the rescue, and was actually carried out to sea and only just rescued in time."
Go on,
said the AC with a sigh. Maine took a deep breath. Dr. Armstrong now, a well-known man, had a consulting room in Harley Street, absolutely straight and above board in his profession. Haven't been able to trace any record of an illegal operation or anything of that kind. It's true there was a woman called Cleese who was operated on by him way back in 1925 at Lathmore, when he was attached to the hospital there. Peritonitis, and she died on the operating table. Maybe he wasn't very skillful over the op. After all, he hadn't much experience. But after all, clumsiness isn't a criminal offense. There was certainly no motive. Then there's Miss Emily Brent. A girl, Beatrice Taylor, was in service to her. Got pregnant, was turned out by her mistress, who went and drowned herself. Not a nice business, but again, not criminal.
That, said the AC, seems to be the point. You and Owen dealt with cases that the law couldn't touch.
Maine went stolidly on with his list. Young Marston was a fairly reckless car driver, had his license endorsed twice, and he ought to have been prohibited from driving, in my opinion. That's all there is to him. The 2 names, John and Lucy Combs, were those of 2 kids he knocked down and killed near Cambridge. Some of his friends of his gave evidence for him, and he was let off with a fine. Can't find anything definite about General MacArthur. A fine record, war service, all the rest of it. Arthur Richmond was serving under him in France and was killed in action. No friction of any kind between him and the general. They were close friends, as a matter of fact. There were some blunders made about that time, commanding officers sacrificing men unnecessarily. Possibly this was a blunder of that kind?
Possibly,
said the AC. Now Philip Lombard. Lombard had been mixed up in some very curious shows abroad. He sailed very near the law once or twice. Got a reputation for daring and for not being over scrupulous. A sort of fellow who might do several murders in some quiet, out-of-the-way spot.
then we come to Blore.
Maine hesitated. He, of course, was one of our lot. The other man stirred.
Blore
Said the assistant commissioner forcibly.
was a bad hat.
You think so, sir? The AC said.
I always thought so, but he was clever enough to get away with it. It's my opinion that he committed black perjury in the Landor case. I wasn't happy about it at the time, but I couldn't find anything. I put Harris onto it and he couldn't find anything. I'm still of the opinion that there was something to find if we'd known how to set about it. That man wasn't straight.
There was a pause. Then Sir Thomas Legg said,
And Isaac Morris is dead, you say? When did he die?
I thought you could soon come to that, sir. Isaac Morris died on the night of August 8th. Took an overdose of sleeping stuff. One of the barbiturates, I understand. There wasn't anything to show where it was accident or suicide. Legg said slowly.
Care to know what I think, Maine?
Perhaps I can guess, sir. Legg said heavily.
That death of Morris's is a damn sight too opportune.
Inspector Maine nodded. He said, I thought you'd say that, sir. The assistant commissioner brought down his fist with a bang on the table. He cried out,
The whole thing's fantastic. Impossible. 10 people killed on a bare rock of an island, and we don't know who did it or why or how.
Maine coughed. He said, Well, it's not quite like that, sir. We do know why, more or less. Some fanatic with a bee in his bonnet about justice. He was out to get people who were beyond the reach of the law. He picked 10 people. Whether they were really guilty or not doesn't matter. The commissioner stirred. He said sharply,
Doesn't it? It seems to me.
He stopped. Inspector Maine waited respectfully. With a sigh, Legg shook his head.
Carry on,
He said.
Just for a minute, I felt I got somewhere. Got, as it were, the clue to the thing. It's gone now. Go ahead, what you were saying.
Maine went on. There were 10 people to be executed, let's say. They were executed. UN accomplished his task, and somehow or other he spirited himself off that island into thin air. The AC said,
First class vanishing trick, but you know, Maine, there must be an explanation.
Maine said, You're thinking, sir, that if the man wasn't on the island, he couldn't have left the island, and according to the account of the interested parties, he never was on the island. Well, then the only explanation possible is that he was actually one of the 10. The AC nodded. Maine said earnestly, We thought of that, sir. We went into it. Now, to begin with, we're not quite in the dark as to what happened on Soldier Island. Vera Claythorne kept a diary, and so did Emily Brent. Old Walgrave made some notes, dry, legal, cryptic stuff, but quite clear, and Blore made notes too, and those accounts tally. The deaths occurred in this order: Marston, Mrs. Rogers, MacArthur, Rogers, Miss Brent, Walgrave. After his death, Vera Claythorne's diary states that Armstrong left the house in the night, and that Blore and Lombard had gone after him. Blore has one more entry in his notebook. Just 2 words. Armstrong disappeared. Now, sir, it seemed to me, taking everything into account, that we might find here a perfectly good solution. Armstrong was drowned, you remember. Granting that Armstrong was mad, what was to prevent him from having killed off all the others and then committed suicide by throwing himself over the cliff? Or perhaps while trying to swim to the mainland? That was a good solution, but it won't do. No, sir, it won't do. First of all, there's the police surgeon's evidence. He got to the island early on the morning of August 13th. He couldn't say much to help us. All he could say was that all people had been dead at least 36 hours, and probably a good deal longer. But he was fairly definite about Armstrong. Said he must have been from 8 to 10 hours in the water before his body was washed up. That works out at this, that Armstrong must have gone into the sea sometime during the night of the 10th to the 11th, and I'll explain why. We found the point where the body was washed up. It had been wedged between 2 rocks, and there was bits of cloth, hair, etc. on them. It must have been deposited there at high water on the 11th, that's to say round about 11 o'clock a.m. After that, the storm subsided, and succeeding high water marks are considerably lower.
You might say, I suppose, that Armstrong managed to polish off the other three before he went into sea that night, but that's another point and one you can't get over. Armstrong's body had been dragged above high water mark. We found it well above the reach of any tide, and it was laid out straight on the ground, all neat and tidy. So that settles one point definitely. Someone was alive on the island after Armstrong was dead. He paused and then went on. And that leaves just what exactly? Here's the position early on the morning of the 11th. Armstrong has disappeared, drowned. That leaves us three people: Lombard, Bloor, Vera Claythorne. Lombard was shot. His body was down by the sea, near Armstrong's. Vera Claythorne was found hanged in her own bedroom. Bloor's body was on the terrace. His head was crushed in by a heavy marble block that it seems reasonable to suppose fell on him from the window above. The AC said sharply,
Whose window?
Vera Claythorne's. Now, sir, let's take each of these cases separately. First, Philip Lombard. Let's say he pushed over that lump of marble onto Bloor. Then he doped Vera Claythorne and strung her up. Lastly, he went down to the seashore and shot himself. But if so, who took away the revolver from him? For that revolver was found up in the house just inside the door at the top of the stairs. Walgrave's room. The AC said,
Any fingerprints on it?
Yes, sir, Vera Claythorne's.
Man alive, then...
I know what you're going to say, sir. That it was Vera Claythorne, that she shot Lombard, took the revolver back to the house, toppled the marble block onto Bloor, and then hanged herself. And that's quite alright up to a point. There's a chair in her bedroom, and on the seat of it there are marks of seaweed, same on her shoes. Looks as though she stood on the chair, adjusted the rope round her neck, and kicked away the chair. But that chair wasn't found kicked over. It was, like all the other chairs, neatly put back against the wall. That was done after Vera Claythorne's death, by someone else. That leaves us with Bloor, and if you tell me that after shooting Lombard and inducing Vera Claythorne to hang herself, he then went out and pulled a string down a whacking great block of marble on himself by trying to string to it or something like that, well, I simply don't believe you. Men don't commit suicide that way. And what's more, Bloor wasn't that kind of man. We knew Bloor, and he was not the man that you'd ever accuse of a desire for abstract justice. The assistant commissioner said,
I agree.
Inspector Main said, and therefore, sir, there must have been someone else on the island. Someone who tidied up when the whole business was over. But where was he all the time, and where did he go to? The Sticklehaven people were absolutely certain that no one could have left the island before the rescue boat got there. But in that case... He stopped. The assistant commissioner said,
In that case?
He sighed. He shook his head. He leaned forward. But in that case, he said, who killed them? A manuscript document sent to Scotland Yard by the master of the Emma Jane, a fishing trawler. From my earliest youth, I realized that my nature was a mass of contradictions. I have, to begin with, an incurably romantic imagination. The practice of throwing a bottle into the sea with an important document inside was one that never failed to thrill me when reading adventure stories as a child. It thrills me still. And for that reason, I have adopted this course. Writing this confession, enclosing it in a bottle, sealing the latter, and casting it into the waves. There is, I suppose, 100 to 1 chance that my confession may be found. And then, or do I flatter myself, a hitherto unsolved murder mystery will be explained. I was born with other traits besides my romantic fancy. I have a definite sadistic delight in seeing or causing death. I remember experiments with wasps, with various garden pests. From an early age, I knew very strongly the lust to kill.
But side by side with this went a contradictory trait: a strong sense of justice. It is abhorrent to me that an innocent person or creature should suffer or die by an act of mine. I have always felt strongly that right should prevail. It may be understood, I think a psychologist would understand, that with my mental makeup being what it was, I adopted the law as a profession. The legal profession satisfied nearly all my instincts. Crime and its punishment have always fascinated me. I enjoy reading every kind of detective story and thriller. I have devised for my own private amusement the most ingenious ways of carrying out a murder. When in due course I came to preside over a court of law, that other secret instinct of mine was encouraged to develop. To see a wretched criminal squirming in the dock, suffering the tortures of the damned, as his doom came slowly and slowly nearer, was to me an exquisite pleasure. Mind you, I took no pleasure in seeing an innocent man there. On at least 2 occasions, I stopped cases where to my mind the accused was palpably innocent, directing the jury that there was no case. Thanks, however, to the fairness and efficiency of our police force, the majority of the accused persons who have come before me to be tried for murder have been guilty. I will say here that such was the case with the man Edward Sutton. His appearance and manner were misleading, and he created a good impression on the jury. But not only the evidence, which was clear though unspectacular, but my own knowledge of criminals told me without any doubt that the man had actually committed the crime with which he was charged, the brutal murder of an elderly woman who trusted him. I have a reputation as a hanging judge, but that is unfair. I have always been strictly just and scrupulous in my summing up of a case. All I have done is to protect the jury against the emotional effect of emotional appeals by some of our more emotional counsel. I have drawn their attention to the actual evidence. For some years past, I have been aware of a change within myself, a lessening of control, a desire to act instead of to judge. I have wanted, let me admit it frankly, to commit a murder myself. I recognize this as the desire of the artist to express himself. I was, or could be, an artist in crime. My imagination, sternly checked by the exigencies of my profession, waxed secretly to colossal force. I must commit a murder. And what is more, it must be no ordinary murder. It must be a fantastical crime. Something stupendous, out of the common. In that one respect, I have still, I think, an adolescent's imagination. I wanted something theatrical, impossible. I wanted to kill. Yes, I wanted to kill. But, incongruous as it may seem to some, I was restrained and hampered by my innate sense of justice. The innocent must not suffer. And then, quite suddenly, the idea came to me, started by a chance remark uttered during casual conversation. It was a doctor to whom I was talking, some ordinary undistinguished general practitioner. He mentioned casually how often murder must be committed, which the law was unable to touch. And he instanced a particular case, that of an old lady, a patient of his who had recently died. He was, he said, himself convinced
that her death was due to the withholding of a restorative drug by a married couple who attended on her, and who stood to benefit very substantially by her death. That sort of thing, he explained, was quite impossible to prove, but he was nevertheless quite sure of it in his own mind. He added that there were many cases of a similar nature going on all the time, cases of deliberate murder, and all quite untouchable by the law. That was the beginning of the whole thing. I suddenly saw my way clear, and I determined to commit not one murder, but murder on a grand scale. A childish rhyme of my infancy came back into my mind, the rhyme of the 10 little soldier boys. It had fascinated me as a child of 2. The inexorable diminishment, the sense of inevitability. I began secretly to collect victims. I will not take up space here by going into details of how this was accomplished. I had a certain routine line of conversation which I employed with nearly everyone I met, and the results I got were really surprising. During the time I was in nursing home, I collected the case of Dr. Armstrong, a violently teetotal sister who attended on me, being anxious to prove to me the evils of drink by recounting to me a case many years ago in hospital when a doctor under the influence of alcohol killed a patient on whom he was operating. A careless question as to where the sister in question had trained, etc., soon gave me the necessary data. I tracked down the doctor and the patient mentioned without difficulty. A conversation between 2 old military gossips in my club put me on the track of General MacArthur. A man who had recently returned from the Amazon gave me a devastating resume of the activities of one Philip Lombard. An indignant memse in Majorca recounted the tale of the Puritan Emily Brent and the wretched servant girl. Anthony Marston I selected from a large group of people who had committed similar offenses. His complete callousness and his inability to feel any responsibility for the lives he had taken made him, I considered, a type dangerous to the community, unfit to live. Ex-Inspector Bloor came my way quite naturally. Some of my professional brethren discussing the Landor case with freedom and vigor. I took a serious view of his offense. The police, as servants of the law, must be of a high order of integrity, for their word is perforce believed by virtue of their profession. Finally, there was the case of Vera Claythorne. It was when I was crossing the Atlantic. At a late hour one night, the sole occupants of the smoking room were myself and a good-looking young man called Hugo Hamilton. Hugo Hamilton was unhappy. To assuage that unhappiness, he had taken a considerable quantity of drink. He was in the maudlin confidential stage. Without much hope of any result, I automatically started my routine conversational gambit. The response was startling. I can remember his words now. He said,
"You're right. Murder isn't what most people think. Giving someone a dollop of arsenic, pushing them over a cliff, that sort of stuff."
He leaned forward, thrusting his face into mine. He said,
"I've known a murderess. Known her, I tell you. And what's more, I was crazy about her. God help me, sometimes I think I still am. It's hell, I tell you. Hell. You see, she did it more or less for me. Not that I ever dreamed. Women are fiends. Absolute fiends. You wouldn't think a girl like that, a nice, straight, jolly girl, you wouldn't think she'd do that, would you? That she'd take a kid out to sea and let it drown. You wouldn't think a woman could do a thing like that.
I said to him, "Are you sure she did do it?" He said, and in saying it, he seemed suddenly to sober up.
I'm quite sure. Nobody else ever thought of it. But I knew the moment I looked at her. When I got back, after. And she knew I knew. What she didn't realize was that I loved that kid. He didn't say any more, but it was easy enough for me to trace back the story and reconstruct it.
I needed a 10th victim. I found him in a man named Morris. He was a shady little creature. Amongst other things, he was a dope peddler, and he was responsible for inducing the daughter of friends of mine to take drugs. She committed suicide at the age of 21. During all this time of search, my plan had been gradually maturing in my mind. It was now complete, and the coping stone to it was an interview I had with a doctor in Harley Street. I have mentioned that I underwent an operation. My interview in Harley Street told me that another operation would be useless. My medical advisor wrapped up the information very prettily, but I am accustomed to getting at the truth of a statement. I did not tell the doctor of my decision, that my death should not be a slow, protracted one as it would be in the course of nature. No, my death should take place in a blaze of excitement. I would live before I died. And now to the actual mechanics of the crime of Soldier Island. To acquire the island, using the man Morris to cover my tracks was easy enough. He was an expert in that sort of thing. Tabulating the information I had collected about my prospective victims, I was able to concoct a suitable bait for each. None of my plans miscarried. All my guests arrived at Soldier Island on the 8th of August. The party included myself. Morris was already accounted for. He suffered from indigestion. Before leaving London, I gave him a capsule to take last thing at night, which had, I said, done wonders for my own gastric juices. He accepted it unhesitatingly. The man was a slight hypochondriac. I had no fear he would leave any compromising documents or memoranda behind. He was not that sort of man. The order of death upon the island had been subjected by me to special thought and care. There were, I considered, among my guests varying degrees of guilt. Those whose guilt was the lightest should, I decided, pass out first, and not suffer the prolonged mental strain and fear that the more cold-blooded offenders were to suffer. Anthony Marston and Mrs. Rogers died first, the one instantaneously, the other in a peaceful sleep. Marston, I recognized, was a type born without that feeling of moral responsibility which most of us have. He was amoral, pagan. Mrs. Rogers, I had no doubt, had acted very largely under the influence of her husband. I need not describe closely how those two met their deaths. The police will have been able to work that out quite easily. Potassium cyanide is easily obtained by householders for putting down wasps. I had some in my possession, and it was easy to slip it into Marston's almost empty glass during the tense period after the gramophone recital. I may say that I watched the faces of my guests closely during that indictment, and I had no doubt whatever, after my long court experience, that one and all were guilty. During recent bouts of pain, I had been ordered a sleeping draught, chloral hydrate. It had been easy for me to suppress this until I had a lethal amount in my possession. When Rogers brought up some brandy for his wife, he set it down on a table, and in passing that table I put the stuff into the brandy. It was easy. for at that time suspicion had not begun to set in. General MacArthur met his death quite painlessly. He did not hear me come up behind him. I had, of course, to choose my time for leaving the terrace very carefully, but everything was successful. As I had anticipated, a search was made of the island, and it was discovered that there was no one on it but our 7 selves. That at once created an atmosphere of suspicion. According to my plan, I should shortly need an ally. I selected Dr. Armstrong for that part. He was a gullible sort of man. He knew me by sight and reputation, and it was inconceivable to him that a man of my standing should actually be a murderer. All his suspicions were directed against Lombard, and I pretended to concur in these. I hinted to him that I had a scheme by which it might be possible to trap the murderer into incriminating himself. Though a search had been made of everyone's room, no search had as yet been made of the persons themselves, but that was bound to come soon. I killed Rogers on the morning of August 10th. He was chopping sticks for lighting the fire and did not hear me approach. I found the key to the dining room door in his pocket. He had locked it the night before. In the confusion attending the finding of Roger's body, I slipped into Lombard's room and abstracted his revolver. I knew that he would have one with him. In fact, I had instructed Morris to suggest as much when he interviewed him. At breakfast, I slipped my last dose of chloro into Miss Brent's coffee when I was refilling her cup. We left her in the dining room. I slipped in there a little while later. She was nearly unconscious, and it was easy to inject a strong solution of cyanide into her. The bumblebee business was really rather childish, but somehow, it pleased me. I liked adhering as closely as possible to the nursery rhyme. Immediately after this, what I had already foreseen happened. Indeed, I believe I suggested it myself. We all submitted to a rigorous search. I had safely hidden away the revolver, and had no more cyanide or chloro in my possession. It was then that I intimated to Armstrong that we must carry our plan into effect. It was simply this: I must appear to be the next victim. That would perhaps rattle the murderer. At any rate, once I was supposed to be dead, I could move about the house and spy upon the unknown murderer. Armstrong was keen on the idea. We carried it out that evening. A little plaster of red mud on the forehead, the red curtain, and the wool, and the stage was set. The lights of the candles were very flickering and uncertain, and the only person who would examine me closely was Armstrong. It worked perfectly. Miss Claythorne screamed the house down when she found the seaweed which I had thoughtfully arranged in her room. They all rushed up, and I took up my pose of a murdered man. The effect on them when they found me was all that could be desired. Armstrong acted his part in the most professional manner. They carried me upstairs and laid me on my bed. Nobody worried about me. They were all too deadly scared and terrified of each other. I had a rendezvous with Armstrong outside the house at 1:45. I took him up a little way behind the house on the edge of the cliff. I said that here we could see if anyone approached us, and we should not be seen from the house as the bedrooms faced the other way. He was still quite unsuspicious, and yet he ought to have been warned. If he had only remembered the words of the nursery rhyme, "A red herring swallowed one." He took the red herring all right. It was quite easy. I uttered an exclamation, leant over the cliff, told him to look. Wasn't that the mouth of a cave? He leant right over. A quick, vigorous push sent him off his balance and splashed into the heaving sea below. I returned to the house. It must have been my footfall that Blore heard. A few minutes later, after I had returned to Armstrong's room, I left it, this time making a certain amount of noise so that someone should hear me. I heard a door open as I got to the bottom of the stairs. They must have just glimpsed my figure as I went out of the front door. It was a minute or two before they followed me. I'd gone straight round the house and in at the dining room window which I had left open. I shut the window, and later I broke the glass. Then I went upstairs and laid myself out again on my bed. I calculated that they would not look closely at any of the corpses, a mere twitch aside of the sheet to satisfy themselves that it was not Armstrong masquerading as a body. This is exactly what occurred. I forgot to say that I returned the revolver to Lombard's room. It may be of interest to someone to know where it was hidden during the search. There was a big pile of tinned food in the larder. I opened the bottommost of the tins. Biscuits, I think it contained. Bedded in the revolver and replaced the strip of adhesive tape. I calculated, and rightly, that no one would think of working their way through a pile of apparently untouched foodstuffs, especially as all the top tins were soldered. The red curtain I had concealed by laying it flat on the seat of one of the drawing room chairs, under the chintz cover, and the wool in the seat cushion, cutting a small hole. And now came the moment that I had anticipated. 3 people who were so frightened of each other that anything might happen, and one of them had a revolver. I watched them from the windows of the house. When Blore came up alone, I had the big marble block poised ready. Exit Blore. From my window I saw Vera Claythorne shoot Lombard, a daring and resourceful young woman. I always thought she was a match for him and more. As soon as that happened, I set the stage in her bedroom. It was an interesting psychological experiment. Would the consciousness of her own guilt, the state of nervous tension consequent on having just shot a man, be sufficient, together with the hypnotic suggestion of the surroundings, to cause her to take her own life? I thought it would. I was right. Vera Claythorne hanged herself before my eyes where I stood in the shadow of the wardrobe. And now, for the last stage. I came forward, picked up the chair, and set it against the wall. I looked for the revolver and found it at the top of the stairs where the girl had dropped it. I was careful to preserve her fingerprints on it. And now, I shall finish writing this. I shall enclose it, seal it in a bottle, and I shall throw the bottle into the sea. Why? Yes, why? It was my ambition to invent a murder mystery that no one could solve. But no artist, I now realize, can be satisfied with art alone. There's a natural craving for recognition which cannot be gainsaid. I have, let me confess it in all humility, a pitiful human wish that someone should know just how clever I have been. In all this, I have assumed that the mystery of Soldier Island will remain unsolved. It may be, of course, that the police will be cleverer than I think. There are, after all, 3 clues. 1. The police are perfectly aware that Edward Seton was guilty. They know, therefore, that one of the 10 people on the island was not a murderer in any sense of the word, and it follows paradoxically that that person must logically be the murderer. The second clue lies in the 7th verse of the nursery rhyme. Armstrong's death is associated with a red herring which he swallowed, or rather, which resulted in swallowing him. That is to say that at that stage of the affair some hocus pocus is clearly indicated, and that Armstrong was deceived by it and sent to his death. That might start a promising line of inquiry. For at that period there are only 4 persons, and of those 4 I am clearly the only one likely to inspire him with confidence. The third is symbolical. The manner of my death marking me on the forehead. The brand of Cain. There is, I think, Little more to say. After entrusting my bottle and its message to the sea, I shall go to my room and lay myself down on the bed. To my eyeglasses is attached what seems a length of fine black cord, but it is elastic cord. I shall lay the weight of my body on the glasses. The cord I shall loop around the door handle and attach it, not too solidly, to the revolver. What I think will happen is this. My hand, protected with a handkerchief, will press the trigger. My hand will fall to my side. The revolver, pulled by the elastic, will recoil to the door. Jarred by the door handle, it will detach itself from the elastic and fall. The elastic, released, will hang down innocently from the eyeglasses on which my body is lying. A handkerchief lying on the floor will cause no comment whatsoever. I shall be found, laid neatly on my bed, shot through the forehead in accordance with the record kept by my fellow victims. Times of death cannot be stated with any accuracy by the time our bodies are examined. And when the sea goes down, there will come from the mainland boats and men, and they will find 10 dead bodies and an unsolved problem on Soldier Island. Signed, Lawrence Wargrave.
And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. The end. Whew. Boy, that was a real doozy, wasn't it? I can see why this is one of the most renowned murder mystery novels of all time. I can definitely see why it's the best-selling and why it's so prominent and famous. Why it has such a reputation. This was some good stuff. Of course, there are things to be said for some of the elements used and language. But as a story, as a murder mystery novel, damn good stuff. And I'm pretty sure that now that I've read this, I'm gonna look back or revisit other mysteries and other plots, and I'm gonna be like, yeah, so this was entirely inspired by this, wasn't it? This is entirely on me, because it was my choice for what the voices sound like. But having the entire last bit be a confession by Wargrave, god damn it, my throat hurts now. Doing that voice for the whole chapter uninterrupted, except for the part where he's quoting Hugo. God damn it. But yeah, what did you all think of that? I think that was a lot of fun. That was really cool. And what do you call it? I'm really glad I read this one. Reminded me a lot of Umaneko. See, that's one that I've been curious to read. So like knowing there's a lot of similarities already kind of interests me. um Whew. That was I'm glad I finished the story with this stream. Like I'm glad that I put in that time. I'm glad I did that because that final stretch was so worth experiencing at once. Like that was a page turner. I honestly, even if I was tired or whatever, I would have wanted to read it all the way through anyway because wow. Oh man. That was that was fun. Thank you guys so much for like joining me on reading that on listening to that one and I hope that the audiobook nature of it was how do I put it? I hope that you guys enjoyed my performance. I hope that the voice acting was bearable. I hope that the narration was good, that the overall like I hope that experiencing this book through me was fun. Let's say that. Yeah, like retroactively, it's obvious. Like you're like, wait a minute. But there was always just enough, like, questionability about it. So it's like, once it's laid out in front of you, like, oh, damn it. But at the same time, what if, you know? And you know what else? Do you know what else? I told you, never rule out anyone who's dead. I've played these games before. Like, if any of you were watching along and you decided, oh, this character's dead, goes to the wiki page, oops. Justice Wargrave, huh? More like Junko Enoshima. No, I'm just kidding. Definitely didn't do that. But yeah, that was really fun. I I really enjoy the like mystery genre, but I think I should probably start to
read something else on stream maybe? Deviate from it for a bit? Actually, you know what? This might have bought me enough time. Because it's the last week of August. And in this household, Halloween season starts September 1st. If Christmas season starts November 1st, then Halloween season starts September 1st. And you know what that means. We're about to start getting real spooky up in here. I have 2 potential ideas for the next book I'm gonna start reading. And between you and me, audience, my wonderful Rainiacs and Langsters, I think I already know which one is gonna win. It's not going to be a horror eroge. That's not a bad idea. But it's not gonna be that. I am going to keep this card close to my chest just for a little bit longer. But don't worry. I intend to put it on the schedule very, very soon. So you'll know what it is once you see it. Well, yeah, this is gonna be real fun. I can't wait. Whew. Halloween season's starting up, which means we're gonna start pivoting a little bit in the content around here. And oh, that's got me so excited. Like, oh my god, I can't wait. That was your Valley Girl Tuscaru for the stream. Time to deep. Ooh, I am really excited. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. I should probably start thinking of signing off because well, the stream has gone long enough for me to finish the story and then have a little bit of a ramble session. But you will see me again very soon on Friday when I play even more Mirror's Edge. hopefully this time, now that I've actually managed to turn off the physics X thing that's been eating all my GPU and screwing over my displays, hopefully now the game will stop breaking on stream for me. So, you'll see me Friday, where we do more of that. Hopefully get farther in the story, or maybe even finish it, so that next week I finally have new things to put on the schedule. Because the one thing I hate being is boring. Predictable is one thing, but I don't want to be boring, so I got to finish this story. Can we finish another story? Let's see. Oh, and by the way, I want to once again thank all my lovely subscribers who answered back when I asked about whether or not the reading streams were enjoyable and fun, and gave me a resounding yes, because honestly, if it weren't for you guys, this might have been the last story I read on stream, and I would have probably just kind of quietly abandoned story time after this. So, thank you for vindicating the primary thesis of this channel's existence, which, as day oneers might remember, and new people might not know, one of the big goals of this channel is to bring more media, what do you call it, more literature and other types of reading heavy media to the audience's attention, sort of advocate for more experiencing of classic novels and just things outside of most people's wheelhouse. And one of my big dreams for this channel is essentially to get people interested in reading, or consuming more audiobooks, or just getting more interested in engaging with more critical thinking oriented, or at least more dense sorts of stories. Whether that be in the form of visual novels or light novels, or just just reading more, essentially. And that sounds insanely weird for a VTuber to want to do for her audience as a virtual entertainer, but as a bit of a bookworm myself, book wolf, I just want to share that love with everyone. So thank you so much for essentially validating that love, and because of it, I'm going to share one of my ultimate favorite books with you guys very soon. So yeah. But anyway, that'll probably do it for us here tonight. I best get on out of here. But yeah, so Friday, Mirror's Edge. See you guys in 45 hours? Until then, make sure you guys are eating well, staying hydrated, because I don't know about you, but over here in Los Angeles, it has been consistently almost triple digits every single day. And get lots of good rest, because sleep is not for the weak, contrary to what the saying goes. And I love sleeping a lot. So, and as always, most importantly, make sure to unshrimp yourselves. Take care. Be kind to yourself. Be excellent to each other. Have a radiant rest of your night. And I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.